Chapter 656. Yi Shiwen only felt the power from his whole body was boiling, rushing out and pouring out through his hands. The blood-red barrier in front of him was repairing those cracks, little by little. Then again, little by little, it got damaged by the spirit bomb. This scene of the process of repairing and destroying looked abnormal and weird. It was a cycle, one after the other. Destruction and repairing. The forces of birth and death boiling in the process. Yi Ziwen's aura was boiling and terrifying while his hair fluttered. Boom. At last, that terrible power had dissipated, and it turned into a sky full of spiritual energy. Yi Shiwen just breathed a sigh of relief, and in the distance came the constant raged roaring of the dragon vein. That dragon vein probably didn't think that Yi Shiwen would be so difficult to deal with. Its body was composed entirely of spiritual energy, and in this environment, it was basically a fish in water. Yet it was unable to kill Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen moved faster than it, as a long sword appeared on his hand. It drew out a monstrous sword light and struck down like lightning. Bang! The sword slashed down smoothly from the middle, and the dragon vein was cut in half. But Yi Shiwen didn't relax, because he felt the dragon corpse that had been split in half was gluing back up little by little. Because it had no relation with a flesh and blood body. It had no spiritual knowledge, just instinct. So even if it was beheaded, it would be able to recover. Yemo, do it! Yi Shiwen yelled, protruding a monstrous hand from within his body, and grabbed at the slowly compounding dragon vein. Although the speed of the dragon vein's regeneration was fast, but to Yi Shiwen, it wasn't too fast at all. The dragon vein roared. But before it could react, it was grabbed tightly by Yi Mo into the Tianyuan mirror. The dragon vein fully recovered in the Tianyuan mirror. It roared continuously. Without the binding of the barrier, it unfolded itself completely. A roar shook the world within the Tianyuan mirror. Spirit bombs flew out and blasted the world, until it was about to collapse. Boom! 4 huge chains fell from the sky, and the bloody chains instantly locked all the limbs, tail and neck of the dragon vein to the ground. Roar! Dragon vein roared, furious. It wanted to break these shackles. It almost succeeded with its efforts, and the shackles were about to break. It was right at this moment, Yemo materialized. He was a great demon. With a wave of his hand, many bloody chains of law descended from the sky and bound into the body of the dragon vein. It was firmly locked just like the spirit of the star beast. The Tianyuan mirror was far different from what it was at the beginning. Back then the Tianyuan mirror wasn't even a great sage tier weapon, and yet it managed to lock up the spirit of the star beast. Not to mention about now. The Tianyuan mirror has already become a great sage tier weapon. Its power is far greater than in the beginning. Back then he had to use all his strength to suppress the spirit of the star beast. But for Yemo now, it doesn't require as much effort as it did before. Now he could completely suppress the dragon vein in a leisure and calm manner. Ha! Yemo shouted, and blood-stained runes began to dance in the sky, falling like raindrops onto the body of that dragon vein. Every rune that fell onto the dragon vein let out a burst of bloody light, followed by the tortured roar of the dragon vein. On the other side of the Tianyuan mirror, elixirs burned wildly in a pile like a small hill. It turned into spiritual energy that poured into Yemo's body like a river. It made Yemo grow larger and larger. It was faster and faster even in the hands, and slowly the runes completely suppressed the dragon vein. Yi Shiwen, it's okay here, leave it to me. Yemo yelled out. He wasn't able to split and come out now. Even though he said that he has initial control of the dragon vein, but it was only the preliminary control. Generally speaking, the dragon veins that are captured are usually placed under the foundation of their martial school and suppressed underneath with a supreme technique. It would be the pride of that martial school. They wouldn't simply move, but only increase in formation, but Yi Shiwen couldn't do that. He had no intention to be independent or develop his own martial school. This dragon vein was only for his personal use, therefore it has to be kept in the Tianyuan mirror. But this was a big trouble and danger as it could be exposed anytime. Once Yi Shiwen is in a heated fight with someone, and he allowed the dragon vein to have a turn, he will be dead for sure. This was not an ordinary thing. It's a dragon vein that could tear great saints apart. So Yemo was to go into hibernation just to suppress this dragon vein. Yi Shiwen has to wait until everything is well prepared before he could use the dragon vein's power for his own use. There are many ways to adjust the strength of the dragon veins for your own use. There is the method that is commonly used by folks to build a cemetery above the dragon vein in a specific way. This would definitely bring good fortune to their descendants. It was the same concept as building the foundation of a martial school on top of a dragon vein. The only difference is its efficiency and strategy. After completely suppressing this dragon vein, Yi Shiwen will be able to enjoy the benefits of this dragon vein exclusively. It is simply indescribable. To Yi Shiwen now, it was simply adding wings onto a ferocious tiger, allowing it to soar into the sky. Seeing that Yi Mo had the situation under control, Yi Shiwen felt relieved. He could finally use the dragon vein for his own use. Thank goodness for the barrier. If the aftermath of the battle was spread outside and discovered by someone, it would cause an uproar. A dragon vein could help a martial school thrive and hold the luck of that school. Once this kind of thing is born, all the great sages will rush to this place in a frenzy. Yi Shiwen was very clear of this. However, Yi Shiwen did not leave in a hurry. It was unknown how long this dragon vein has been pinned here and how much spiritual energy it has emitted. This dragon vein itself doesn't know how to cultivate and only continuously emit spiritual energy. The spiritual energy here could almost be considered to be solidified. Moreover, it was emitted directly from a dragon vein, and not some second-class spirit vein. Yi Shiwen wouldn't give up naturally. He sat directly in the void and started operating the scripture of viewing people. Yi Shiwen turned into a boundless starry sky. The countless stars in the sky started turning in a frenzied manner, and absorbed all the spiritual energy, all of it flowing into his body. Slowly, the uncountable spiritual energy beside Yi Shiwen swept into a hurricane around him. It formed into a cocoon of spiritual energy, and wrapped him completely inside it. Time passed day by day. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Bang! The cocoon became very thin after 3 days and nights of frenzied absorption, that the humanoid figure inside was almost visible. The cocoon completely shattered with a loud explosion, revealing Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes and a strong aura poured out. These 3 days were like 3 years or 30 years to him. Countless spiritual energy gushed towards him. It was as if the sea capsized over you, and you have to absorb all the seawater in the shortest amount of time. It was much more urgent compared to when he cultivated on his own. It actually took him 3 days and 3 nights to absorb with his current capacity of absorption. The massive amount of spiritual energy was almost impossible to imagine. However, these 3 days and 3 nights of desperate absorption was not without any benefits. The crazy absorption of spiritual energy during these 3 days and 3 nights has completely consolidated his cultivation into the early stages of a half-step great sage, and even reached the peak of it. With a little more time, he would completely cross over to the middle stage of a half-step great sage. Even he didn't expect that he could reach the peak in such a short amount of time. Although the transformation of his soul has been completed, but compared with ordinary people, the speed of his progress was incomparable, nor can he be mandated by an ordinary person's standards. But he still felt that it would take several years to cross over the mid-stage of a half-step great sage. This was faster than an average person. It was only that he didn't expect it to be so soon that he was able to cross into the mid-stage of a half-step great sage already. However, Yi Shiwen thought about it and still didn't decide to make a breakthrough here. It was too dangerous to make a breakthrough in this place where a great sage may appear at any time. Moreover, Yi Mo's main energy was focused on suppressing the dragon veins. It was better to retreat back to the true martial school. On the endless plains on the Wind Dragon Star, a golden light flashed and a figure appeared on the plains. Yi Shiwen was about to fly out of the Wind Dragon Star to true martial school. Suddenly, the sky was torn apart and a figure walked out. It was a tall man with dark face and long beard, staring at Yi Shiwen with a fierce look. A horrible atmosphere spread all over. It was not the aura of an ordinary great sage, but the magical energy that Yi Shiwen was very familiar with. But there was only one type of people with this kind of impure demonic aura, which was the demon-worshipping religion. Yi Ziwen's eyes flashed brilliantly. He didn't expect that he would meet an elite from the demon-worshipping religion here. In fact, because of the impact of demon realm has on this starry sky, the demon-worshipping religion can be said to have great influence on all worlds. They had many elites. The demon-worshipping religion in the true martial world were the strongest. Because there was no force that could control the world, there was no way to completely suppress the demon-worshipping religion. The power of the demon-worshipping religion was usually more rampant in these worlds that were more chaotic. If all the forces of the demon-worshipping religion is unified, it would be terrifying. It could cause huge magic disasters. The good thing was that the demon-worshipping religion has their own factions and can't be unified. Chapter 657. If the power from all the demon-worshipping religion were to unite, it would probably be enough to sweep across the entire world. But fortunately, their internal affairs were more chaotic than the real martial world. If many warriors were untamed through the generations, then these demonized warriors are all cruel people who have little morality. Yi Shiwen was on guard immediately. The macho man looked at Yi Shiwen coldly and said, "I am the leader of the Soul Destruction Temple, Nyahan. You can tell the old emperor who killed you once you go to hell." Yi Shiwen was shocked. Someone the level of a temple master actually appeared. Such a character is also a high-powered person in the demon-worshipping religion. Since he is in charge of a temple, he must be at the very least an elite in the Holy Realm. It is said that there are 99 temples within the demon-worshipping religion, and every single temple master was equal. However, out of the 99 temples, the temple masters of the top 10 ranks are people who have surpassed the Holy Realm. They were all terrifying people due to the terrifying strength of the demon-worshipping religion. It was clearly evident of this. The macho man finished speaking and immediately shot a single palm towards Yi Shiwen. It was directed at Yi Shiwen, and a monstrous demonic beast pressed down, crushing the heavens as well. A terrifying aura locked Yi Shiwen firmly. Sky-collapsing fire cloud hand. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate anymore and blasted out the sky-collapsing fire cloud hand. Boom! The two big hands met in the air and boundless godly light exploded. A terrifying howling wind swept out. Yi Shiwen's sky-collapsing fire cloud hand seemed like it was made of sand. It crumbled bit by bit under the attack of Nyahan's demonic beast, just like it was washed by a sea wave, and completely crumbled. Yi Shiwen, hurry up and retreat. Yi Mo roared in Yi Shiwen's mind. He knew even without needing Yi Mo to tell him that. This Nyahan in front of him was really terrifying to no bounds. It was most likely that Nyahan was already in the stage of a full-fledged great sage. It was only possible to deal with such a terrifying character if elder senior brother was present. Moreover, such a character could only be ranked at the bottom amongst so many demon-worshipping religion temple masters. The others that were nearing the top ranks are basically at the peak stage of a great sage, and the top few of them have surpassed a great sage. Even if the Star Beast avatar was summoned, it wouldn't be an opponent for such a character. Not to mention that the elixirs in Yi Shiwen's body were almost completely consumed during the fight with the dragon vein. There wasn't enough for him to summon his full strength to battle again. Yi Shiwen only felt a sharp pain in his entire arm, and it almost broke. His strength had a huge difference compared to this Nyahan. Although he was able to have the power of an early-stage great sage by using the Tianyuan mirror, but an early-stage great sage was nothing compared to a fully developed great sage. It was like a giant and an ant. His avatar also seemed to receive a huge shock, and began to protect its master instinctively. A golden divinity permeated his whole body. It protected Yi Shiwen. It used the Phoenix regeneration technique, and repaired the internal injuries caused by the shock. Only then did it make him feel better. Then Nyahan looked at Yi Shiwen strangely. He didn't expect that he couldn't kill Yi Shiwen with a single smash. Nyahan didn't respect Yi Shiwen as Yi Shiwen was just a half-step great sage. He could simply be crushed to death. Someone who was incomparable to even an ant could actually receive a hit from him and be fine. This roused his curiosity. But the curiosity only lasted for a moment before Nyahan's face showed ferociousness and excitement, saying, "Yi Shiwen, you have bad luck. I don't know which important person you have disrespected. There was an order from the demon realm that we must have your head. If I manage to slaughter you, then I can become a mid-tier demon in the demon realm, or even be consecrated by the demon king. I can improve in leaps and bounds and surpass a great sage. It will save me many years of cultivation. By then, the demon-worshipping religion will be mine solely. This is godsend. I found you before those people, so just accept your death. Yi Ziwen's brow frowned slightly. There would actually be such a command from the demon realm. The demon-worshipping religion and demon realm are deeply entrenched and were dominated by the demons. However, there were also various forces big and small within the demons. That is why the demon-worshipping religion is torn apart and even has internal battles. Their masters were hostile to each other and would even slaughter each other. It's just that news doesn't reach the human world so easily. So unless it was a huge deal, these issues were usually handled by the leader of the demon-worshipping religion in that world. Now there was an order for him to be killed. Yi Shiwen was an insignificant character that was barely a half-step great sage. If he showed any outstanding potential, he would have become the target of the demon-worshipping religion. This sort of thing has happened before, and it is still happening at every moment. The demon-worshipping religion constantly assassinates people with outstanding potential. But there was no need to alarm the entire demon realm. What kind of place is the demon realm? It was a place that had terrifying powers, and many worlds need to be united to hold out against it. In that kind of place, the great sages are on batches, and it was unremarkable at all. No matter how amazing a human warrior was, it was impossible to attract demon realm's attention until a certain point. But now that the command to kill Yi Shiwen came from demon realm, how could this not surprise Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen was still quite confident, but having confidence and arrogance is not the same thing at all. This feeling was like mingling with a certain criminal gang from on the street, and now he has been noticed by the national forces. Yi Shiwen wanted to shout out loud, "Motherfucker, this isn't logical." Even if it was impossible for all the elites of the demon realm to come forth, even stimulating some elites from the demon-worshipping religion was a terrifying thing for him. Although it seemed quite good that Yi Shiwen could fight against an early-stage great sage, it was only that way to the younger generation. In reality, that was nothing to a real elite. Moreover, in this world, it could be said that there are many geniuses on the market. Every generation would have their own genius. To what extent would the geniuses be if they cultivated for several thousand years? Each one of them could possibly be a death threat to Yi Shiwen. Moreover, from what Nyahan said just now, there would be some big names in the demon realm that would empower the person personally and break through past a great sage. It would cause many people's madness. If there is a certain way to break into the holy realm, then the difficulty of breaking through the great sage from the holy realm would be 100 times, or 1,000 times more. One would know by taking a look at how many great sages there are in the realm martial school, and how many elites actually managed to break through the holy realm. The difficulty was almost expanded by 100-fold and 1,000-fold. Now that there are big shots from the demon realm that would personally come to empower people, how many elites would be attracted? It was hard to imagine. Moreover, in their opinion, Yi Shiwen was just an ordinary half-step great sage, although he was said to be the strongest under the great saint. But for them, it is just a stronger ant. One could gain such a high return for killing an ant. Who wouldn't do it? In fact, with Yi Ziwen's current strength, he was indeed no different from an ant in front of them. Even if the Star Beast avatar was summoned, it wouldn't be any better. Right now Yi Shiwen just wanted to quickly return to the true martial school. Originally, it was only to cultivate in an undisturbed environment. But now it was really to keep himself safe. It could be said that for some period of time after this, there will be many elites from the demon realm that would go crazy searching for his whereabouts. It was absolutely creepy to think that groups of great sages would want to fight him. Moreover, it was not only the elites in the demon-worshipping religion. Because of his performance during the trial in the demon realm, many prestigious schools in the true martial world wanted to get rid of him quickly. In fact, he could be considered a universal enemy now. At this time, in the vast universe, aside from the huge true martial school, there was nowhere else that he could land his feet. Die for me, Nyahan told. A terrifying hand grabbed towards Yi Shiwen. Monstrous spiritual energy emerged from it. Yi Shiwen could see obviously that there were layers upon layers of laws and runes on the monstrous hand. This palm reflected the terrifying extent of Niahan's cultivation. The palm smacked over. Yi Shiwen felt that it wasn't a normal shot, it was a law suppressing towards him. Under this terrifying law, it was like a little leaf-like flatboat facing the sea. It could be overturned at any moment. A full-fledged elite great sage's full power instantly made him become an ant. Break for me. Yi Shiwen yelled as his body was wrapped up my golden divinity. It turned into a golden lighting and swept outwards. It bombarded the big hand madly, striking outwards so that he could escape from the big hand. Boom, boom, boom. Loud sounds of explosions sounded as a terrifying storm swept out in circles. It attacked the big hand continuously, but the big hand only gripped tighter, leaving Yi Shiwen with nowhere to hide. This was the most helpless battle that Yi Shiwen has ever encountered since he started practicing martial arts. This was the most helpless battle he has ever been in, although it wasn't the most dangerous, as he had been in more dangerous battles. But back then, he was never this helpless even though it was dangerous. The gap in strengths on the two sides was too large. It was so large to the point that Yi Shiwen found it difficult to escape. Ah! Yi Shiwen shouted. A blood-colored light boiled around his body. At this time, he couldn't care about it and had to borrow power from the Tianyuan mirror. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to open it with his own power. Boom! Countless red-colored energy formed into a huge energy ball and blasted out. The big hand shook. Finally, it was no longer unmoving, and there was a gap between its fingers. It's now. Yi Shiwen turned into a stream of gold light and flew in instantly. Chapter 658. Yi Shiwen has now reached the point of life and death. It could even be considered as unprecedentedly dangerous. If he were to confront directly, he did not even have any chance of victory at all. It was impossible to win. He could only try desperately, and only to try desperately to escape. Even if he tried desperately, he was not qualified to defeat that great sage. Want to escape? Niahan's roar came from the sky. Letting Yi Shiwen as a half-step sage to slip away was a disgrace to him. When he turned his palm, he immediately exuded endless power from it. He immediately turned his hands and toward Yi Shiwen and pressured him again. Yi Shiwen was crushed immediately in the air, almost crushing him into pieces. Yi Shiwen almost immediately felt that the space around him was crushed into fragments, and his body was immediately covered with layers of golden divinity, protecting him in it. Then he almost got controlled by Niahan again immediately after this. He was like a caged bird that couldn't escape at all. However, Yi Shiwen was well prepared. How could he make the same mistake again? A pair of golden wings spread out behind him instantly, stretching out 10 meters. On the wings, there were sounds of thunder and explosion, and a roaring boom. Waves of wind and thunder were sweeping toward that big hand. Boom! The wind and thunder fell to Niahan's big hand, and a fierce explosion burst open. Even his big hand shook, but only for a while. However, this little time was enough for Yi Shiwen. The pair of wings behind him suddenly waved. His body was almost wrapped in a force of wind and thunder. He instantly flew countless meters, escaping the pursuit of the attack range of the big hand. There was a burst of angry roar from behind Niahan. He never thought there would be so much troubles to kill such an ant in the eyes of Yi Shiwen. Letting Yi Shiwen slip away from his hands again was the most shameful thing. If this was known by the others, not to mention that his reputation would be ruined, he wouldn't even have face to face the others. Just die. Niahan growled. He immediately pursued. He launched a series of demon fist, creating a huge shadow of a demon that was targeting at Yi Shiwen. The speed was extremely fast, but it only took a moment to reach Yi Shiwen. Although his skill was not as exaggerated as Yi Zaiwen's demon's wings, it did not mean his speed was slow. After all, his skill was not too bad. In addition, Yi Zaiwen's skill was not within the same grade with him at all, so the gap was actually not as large as expected. Ho! Yi Shiwen screamed. Demon's wings fanned wildly. Each fanning that was full of the power of wind and thunder almost changed the color of the heaven and the earth, shooting out a sword chi. Suddenly, the sword chi rose straight into the, shattering the cloud in the sky. It rose up when it met the wind, instantly turning into a 12-mile-long monstrous sword and striking down like lightning. all of which were condensed by Yi Zaiwen's sword will. Unless he could defeat Yi Zaiwen's sword will, otherwise it was absolutely impossible to completely defeat Yi Shiwen. But this sword will was copied by Yi Shiwen on the repressed old man in the grave of the Demon Lord. Yi Shiwen didn't understand what does a Demon Lord mean, but now he understood it. When a Demon Lord appeared, it would be the end of the world. Even the true martial school that was at its peak need to go all out to deal with it, so it could be imagined that how horrible a Demon Lord was. That was a higher realm than the Great Saint. However, the Demon Lord was actually dead, and there was an old man suppressing it. Although it was only spirit, it was also powerful. Yi Shiwen used this deduction to simulate the sword will. He had never failed in every battle until now. Boom. The whole world seemed to be in shock. The sword will was shattered inch by inch under the huge fist in the sky. All his spirit and sword will applied on it were all distorted and shattered in an instant. There was no way to stop this demon shadow from advancing. PFF. Yi Shiwen spurted blood and flew out, like a kite with a broken line. Yi Shiwen didn't try to stop it. He just let his body flew out. Finally it stopped. He bit the blood on the corner of the mouth and circulate Tianhuang regeneration technique in the body to heal the injury on the body. He had achieved his purpose. First, he stopped the demon shadow from advancing. Although it was only a moment, it was still valuable for him. Moreover, he also flew out for dozens of miles by using this force. He completely escaped the attack range of the big hand. Go! Yi Shiwen yelled loudly, then the pair of wind and thunder wings behind them suddenly fanned. He turned into a cloud of wind and thunder, and flew away. His speed was really too fast, but in an instant, he had flew out of the wind dragon star. The angry roar of Nyahan came behind him. Little bastard, don't try to escape. Even if you escape to the ends of the earth, you can't escape my pursuit. He was really furious for letting Yi Shiwen escape. As a great saint, he actually let the early stage half-step sage escape. For him, this was simply a shame. And it also depended on whether he could break through the great saint. Although the cultivation that had been instilled by others was definitely not as good as his own cultivation. With his cultivation, he knew that he was unlikely to have the opportunity to really break through the great saint. Among of the 99 temple masters of demon worshipper, he was also the bottom one. His cultivation and talent were not as high as others, so he knew that this may be the only opportunity he broke through the great saint. It was absolutely impossible for him to let go. With the help of this impact, Yi Shiwen rushed out of the wind dragon star for a while, and his injuries were almost repaired a moment later. At this time, he had already rushed to the vicinity of Wind Dragon City. With such a big movement, it suddenly shocked many experts in Wind Dragon City. Yai, isn't that Yi Shiwen? What is he running in a panic? With his cultivation, what terrible master did he encounter in order to make him flee so frightfully? A few days ago, everyone still remembered Yi Zaiwen's mighty power of beheading a great saint in Wind Dragon City. Now that they saw him running in a fluster, all of them felt exceptionally strange. Immediately after that, there was an angry roar from the Wind Dragon Star. A terrible shadow ran after him across the void. Just die. Chapter 659. Just die. There was a terrifying roar of great sage echoing in everyone's ears. It almost shattered the entire universe. A huge demon hand fell from the sky to catch Yi Shiwen. However, every time the hand tried to catch Yi Shiwen managed to escape with his demon's wings. After a while, Nyahan's figure appeared in front of everyone. Although demon-worshipping religion's reputation in the global association was foul, with everyone treated them as street rats, Nyahan was different. With his strength, there were very few people who could defeat him in this world. A mouse that is larger than a cat can devour the cat instead. With his cultivation, as long he wasn't too close to the true martial school, there would be no one capable of defeating him. He was simply unbridled with no worries as he went straight to Yi Shiwen. As soon as the pursuit stormed the Wind Dragon City, everyone understood why Yi Shiwen would flee in embarrassment. It turned out that it was because of being hunted by this great sage. In the encounter of a terrifying great sage, there was no surprise to flee. Isn't that demon-worshipping religion, Soul Destruction Temple Master? Someone recognized Nyahan's identity, and immediately inflicted a series of huge grasps of cold air. Soul Destruction Temple Master Nyahan was ranked at the back, though not the last among the 99 temples of demon-worshipping religion. However, he was treated as a horrifying legend by the dwellers. He alone could bring great ruin to Wine Dragon City. Although there were many great sages in the city, no one could compete with a legend like Nyahan. During this very moment, the experts who originally shouted the propaganda to eliminate the evils of demon-worshipping religion had collectively lost their voices and didn't know what to say. Generally speaking, it was pretty normal to portray a supportive attitude in eliminating the evildoers. But in this case, if they want to get rid of the evildoers to support justice with their strength, it is very likely that they will be eliminated the evildoers first. Although they did not know why Yi Shiwen was desperately pursued by a terrible master like Nyahan, everyone still spread the news at this moment. The emergence of Soul Destruction Temple Master Nyahan was definitely a thing that shakes the world. When such a grand villain appeared, it would attract the attention of countless experts. Although they couldn't defeat Nyahan, it didn't mean that no one could. There were always hope to have someone capable of bringing down Nyahan. When the news of Soul Destruction Temple Master immediately spread out, the news that Yi Shiwen was pursued was spread alongside. No one figured out what happened. The speed of the two was too fast. They had disappeared into Wind Dragon City at light speed, shocking all the dwellers. It was particularly shocking for those who had ill intentions for Yi Shiwen. It was normal for Nyahan to have such a speed. The terrible power of Great Sage couldn't be ignored by anyone. Anyone knew what terrible power he represented. However, how could Yi Shiwen, a half-step Great Sage amateur, even fend off himself from the Great Sage Nyahan? At least, in the aspect of speed, Nyahan couldn't catch him. This was simply a miracle. The speed of a Great Gauge was inferior to a half-step Great Sage. They wanted to see it more clearly, but they could no longer see them. Boom, boom, boom. The huge demon hand constantly slapped on Yi Shiwen's surroundings, blasted down many spaces and created many voids. The surroundings fell into a chaotic flow of time and space with horrifying chaos masses poured out. Yi Shiwen vigorously flapping the demon's wings behind him. He managed to avoid Nyahan's attack at the critical moment. The demon's wings was indeed a great ability, but the host's strength was still far too inferior. At this time, he was not sorry for those elixir. The life and death moment forbid him from being stingy. The elixirs were consumed in the quantity of 100,000 each batch. In Tianyuan Mirror, one could witness piles of elixirs being consumed to the end. Under normal circumstances, it was not necessary to do so. It was because his demon's wings were usually quite fast. In the very moment, it was not enough to avoid Nyahan's attack. Little brat, I will definitely mince you up. Nyahan's roar kept coming. For him, it was a shame for Yi Shiwen to escape. This was still the case where his cultivation was far higher than Yi Shiwen. If his cultivation was not as good as Yi Shiwen, then he would be left behind by Yi Shiwen in the blink of an eye. Generally, half-step Great Sage couldn't even see his shadow, let alone being able to catch up. Old bastard, don't bump into my hands in the future, or you will definitely have a tragic end. Now that he was pursued to the point of having no place to go, Yi Shiwen was also getting irritated with Nyahan. He didn't care why Nyahan and how many reasons Nyahan had to pursue him. Since he set foot on the martial arts path, he had not fought such a battle that he was unmatched to an opponent at all. He could only flee but could not fight back. Almost every moment, while Yi Shiwen was fleeing frantically, he also obtained insights of demon's wings little by little. As the saying goes, human potential is oozed out by the pressure. Yi Shiwen now could feel this saying closely to his heart. Human potential is forged under pressure. Under Nyahan's pursuit, his understanding of demon's wings was improving little by little at a speed that he could hardly imagine. That was why he could repeatedly escape from Nyahan. Yi Shiwen's goal was very clear, that was to flee to the direction of true martial school. At this time, only true martial school might protect him, and have the ability to protect him. Nyahan obviously knew what Yi Shiwen wanted to do, which was to escape to true martial school. Although he was arrogant, he also knew where true martial school was. It once ruled the real martial realm, occupying all the places in the southern region. There was no demerit to overestimate such giants. Once Yi Shiwen escaped into it, he would never dare to approach it. Therefore Yi Shiwen must be killed before he escaped. Otherwise, he could only watch his prey escape, which might be the only chance in this life to break through the great sage realm, and be wasted like this. Yi Ziwen's speed was too fast. In this endless starry sky, even a moment of negligence might allow Yi Ziwen's escape. This starry sky was more immaculate than the sea. Great Sage was just a drop in the ocean. They were nothing at all. He didn't dare to relax at all, but just kept grabbing at Yi Shiwen to determine his position, and not let him escape. Yi Shiwen secretly said in his heart that he did not expect that the strength of Great Holy Realm would be so great. With his current strength, approaching a Great Holy Realm might be a dead wish. His opponent Mu Xingjie in true martial school was probably such an opponent. Now thinking about it, he really overestimated himself and challenged the great sage as a sage. At that time, in Mu Xingjie's eyes, Yi Shiwen was just a kid who didn't know the limits. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen was suddenly stunned. I need to be extra careful. If Mu Sheng comes out from his close cultivation, there will be no one capable of protecting me except for my senior or my master, Zhang Xingzi. It was merely a brief moment, yet the two had leapt through thousands of miles, chasing and escaping into the atmosphere of the real martial realm. The two were like two dazzling meteors rubbing in the atmosphere in dazzling light. Seeing that true martial school was close at hand, Niahan was so angry. If this continued, Yi Shiwen could survive. Just die already. Suddenly he made a move. Between heaven and earth, the colors suddenly changed. The countless spiritual energy in the sky condensed in an instant, and was contaminated into a magic gas. It slowly condensed into a spear the size of a mountain, exuding unbelievable evil aura. Holy Destroyer Lance! Yi Emo exclaimed. Yi Shiwen, hurry up, this is a very horrific art in Demon Realm. It is called the Holy Destroyer Lance. It was a magical weapon once wielded by a demon ruler, allowing him to run amok. Later, the sacred lance was lost, but it had left an art to summon some remains of the sacred lance aura. No one could withstand it. Then, Niahan seemed to have consumed endless energy. For a moment, his body was slightly crooked with his face a little pale. He seemed to be a lot older at an instant. This was the ramifications for forcibly launching this terrible magic. With the necessary cultivation to activate the art yet forcefully activating it, the price would be his lifespan. No one knew how long the lifespan he sacrificed. It was a great loss just to kill Yi Shiwen. Boom. The demonic lance cut through the sky, instantly smashing all the defenses on Yi Ziwen's body, and pierced into Yi Ziwen's back. Yi Shiwen spat blood, and almost his body was pierced by this magic lance. From a distance, Yi Shiwen, who spread his wings, was like a fallen angel experiencing a terribly hit. He fell down the sky at a horrifying speed, and fell directly into the sky of true martial school. Yi Shiwen was relieved. It seemed that he was finally saved. Chapter 660. Yi Shiwen knew how horrible the blow was just now. That lance took away all the life of his internal organs in just an instant. If it wasn't for the effect of his physical training already spreading over the internal organs, just that one blow was enough to make him perish. Never mind Yi Shiwen, if it was ordinary great sages, there was only one ending for them. They would be crucified on the ground with no element of luck to escape. Yi Shiwen was now holding his last straw to stay alive. If it weren't for the Phoenix regeneration technique, he would be completely dead at this time, and it would be impossible to survive. The destruction power of the Holy Destroyer Lance lived up to its name. That Niahan had spent such a great price to summon the Holy Destroyer Lance aura. It was indeed terrifying. Evildoer, you dared to offend true martial school. Suddenly, a loud yell came from true martial school. Niahan's tyrannical strength and overspilled magical power rose in the air. With the complement of Holy Destroyer Lance's evil aura seemingly ready to destroy the world that was almost visible to the naked eye, it had directly shocked many experts in true martial school. Suddenly, a horrifying aura of true martial school surged forward, locking directly at Niahan. Niahan's face changed instantaneously. He had indeed made a miscalculation. Just now, he saw Yi Shiwen escaping from his hands. The depressed mood made him disregard the fact that he had rushed into the range of true martial school and made a move to launch the Holy Destroyer Lance into Yi Ziwen's body. Even though he was surprised that Yi Shiwen did not directly turn into minced meat, he was very confident in the power of the Holy Destroyer Lance. Yi Shiwen should have perished since it was impossible to survive from it. However, the person who should really be careful at this moment would be him. He had unknowingly rushed into the true martial school's territory. Sure enough, in the true martial school, countless masters were instantly shocked. Immediately, Nyahan stepped on the light and fled without any hesitation. Fleeing. Do you still have the chance even if you realize it now? A cold snort came from true martial school. A big hand almost towering the sky pressed down and grabbed Nyahan. Nyahan's great mastery in Great Sage Realm was like an immature child in the face of this huge hand. It was exactly like how Yi Shiwen was when facing him. There was no way to fight back. It was a big shot in true martial school who made the move. Nyahan's power was nothing at all in front of the power beyond the Great Sage Realm. This was the power surpassed the Great Sage Realm that he longed for day and night. But now this power came to pursue his life. Bang! He couldn't escape at all, and was slammed directly by the big hand. His body was sent flying like a cannonball. The solid body akin to the demon had almost disintegrated at this moment. Pooh! Nyahan spat out blood. He did not hesitate at that instant as he quickly bit and stopped the blood trace. All the blood in his body smoldered, activating a secret technique. His figure quickly disappeared in a clump of bloody light, disappearing in the sky from the real martial world. Nyahan was greatly depressed. He had just summoned Holy Destroyer Lance with countless ramifications. In addition, now that he was slammed directly by the master who surpassed the Great Sage Realm, it was already unfortunate that he didn't die. Even so, he could basically conclude that even if he survives this time, his cultivation would drop from great mastery to minor mastery. Thinking of this, he almost trembled in fear. As a matter of fact, in Demon World, there were only unreserved mutual killing. The law of the jungle was manifested there fully. In demon-worshipping religion, he could become the temple master of the Soul Destruction Temple not just because of his superb means, but also his overwhelming strength that played an important role. However, his strength was not as overwhelming as he previously was. He could completely imagine what kind of turmoil and chaos Soul Destruction Temple would face. But then he thought that he had killed Yi Shiwen, and he could get the empowerment of the big shots in Demon World. With that, he felt better again. Overall, it was not a loss. However, he wouldn't know Yi Shiwen, whom he had thought was dead for a long time, had recovered quite a bit during the period when he fell from the sky. The insurmountable power of the Phoenix regeneration technique was once again manifested. When he rolled directly into the true martial school, he finally escaped from his dying state that was holding the last straw of life. If not, he might even become the first half-step great sage that became famous for the death from falling from the sky. At that time, he was indeed holding his last breath. If he was not careful, he would die from falling as he couldn't stand any further fatal injuries. Yi Shiwen, are you okay? Yi Mo asked with concern. He couldn't be of any help in the fight just now. Most of Tianyuan Mirror's power was used to suppress that dragon vein. He could only watch but not help. Otherwise, if this dragon vein was allowed to run amok, it could only be said to be worse for Yi Shiwen. It's okay. He am not dead yet. Yi Shiwen chuckled, and it tore the wound on his body. He grinned to the sudden pain. His entire body seemed to be split into pieces, not belonging to him. He was almost penetrated and nailed in true martial school. Even the domineering body was so vulnerable. After this incident, Yi Shiwen understood the truth. Whether it was domineering body or other martial arts, it was all just a mean. What really determined everything was strong cultivation. Like Nyahan, the magic skills he learned were far from being comparable to Yi Shiwen, but he relied on his own cultivation to chase Yi Shiwen to true martial school like a dog. But this Holy Destroyer Lance is really powerful. If there is no Phoenix regeneration technique to hold my lifeline, my soul might have already perished. Yi Shiwen also had to admit that the Holy Destroyer Lance was really powerful. Of course it is powerful. He has summoned the Holy Destroyer Lance aura from God knows where it is hidden. Even if there is only a trace, it is fatal to you. That lance was once wielded in the hand of the demon ruler. A lance that has destroyed a world, said Yemo. I wonder how much it cost that guy to summon a trace of its aura. Yi Shiwen listened to Yemo's words. He was grinning in pain, yet he couldn't help but heave a cold sigh. A lance that had destroyed a world. That was a world like the real martial world. It was destroyed in one shot. Yi Shiwen simply couldn't imagine what kind of power could reach such a point where one shot would destroy one world. Destroy the world with one shot. Yi Shiwen found that the more he understood, the more difficult it was to imagine the power of this world, and the more he understood his ignorance and naivety. Soon, the 3 people from Tibetan Star Summit who got the news arrived and took Yi Shiwen back to the Tibetan Star Summit. The news of Yi Ziwen's return was like a locust. It spread throughout the true martial school overnight. Many people vowed to say that they saw Yi Shiwen escape from the demon-worshipping religion Soul Destruction Temple Master. After this story spread, it immediately caused a great uproar. What was the power of demon-worshipping religion? Many people disdained demon-worshipping religion. They couldn't understand why they worshipped the demon worship, and they thought those cultists were brainwashed by the devil. But no one dared to say that demon-worshipping religion was not strong. If demon-worshipping religion is not strong, then they would have been annihilated by many martial arts. Among them, who could serve as a temple master, were all great characters in Great Sage Realm. Such characters, even in true martial school, carried a heavy weight. Most people need to look up on their presence. Yi Shiwen actually escaped from such a master. Such a feat was a legend in itself. The usual great sage could not achieve this feat at all, let alone a half-step great sage like Yi Shiwen. In the eyes of a temple master like Nyahan, he was really no different from the ants. For a while, the performance of Yi Shiwen in Demon Realm's trials, which had calmed down, suddenly became trendy again, and became the focus of countless people. What? Did Yi Shiwen escape from the demon-worshipping religion temple master? How is that possible? It is impossible. I don't believe that. Any of the demon-worshipping religion temple master are great sage. Who is Yi Shiwen? How could he escape from them? If I remember correctly, he's just a half-step great sage. You can't joke like this. Many people did not believe this rumor at all. Generally, when half-step great sage could escape from the ordinary great sage, it was enough to make him famous. It was simply an impossible feat to escape from demon-worshipping religion temple master. I wasn't mistaken. I was there at the time. I really saw it. I can't be wrong. Never mind, they do NT believe it. Even the tops of true martial school are hard to believe, but at that time the movement made by Nyahan was too great, and shocked most of the tops of true martial school. They all saw it. It was indeed Nyahan. Even if they didn't want to believe it, there was no other way since they saw it. At that time, Nyahan was already anxious and impatient. He obviously was helpless with Yi Shiwen. Only then did he pay a large price to summon the Holy Destroyer Lance to kill Yi Shiwen. While they were still discussing it, the news from Wind Dragon City came consecutively. Yi Shiwen killed many half-step great sage masters at Emergence School in succession, and killed the great sage Yuzuan. It really caused an uproar. There were many explanations to escape from the great sage. It could be said that there were elements of luck. However, killing a great sage was beyond the imagination of everyone. The reason why great sage was noble and high was because of their overbearing strength. When did half-step great sage capable of killing the great sage? It was simply not reasonable. When everyone was looking for Yi Shiwen for verification, everyone was told that Yi Shiwen was in closed cultivation. Chapter 661. Indeed, Yi Shiwen was in closed cultivation. This time, he deeply understood his inability. He did achieve shocking feats considered by many people to fight against Great Sage, and to kill Great Sage Amateur. However, in the end, he still could not fight back in the face of absolute strength despite those shocking achievements. Strength. Only strength could give him the power to protect himself in an increasingly chaotic world today. Without sufficient strength, all goals were illusory and could not be achieved. So, when he recovered well enough using the Phoenix regeneration technique, He immediately went to close cultivation. Tibetan Star Summit was the safest place that Yi Shiwen could think of so far. Masters such as Bai Jiansong could protect him during his cultivation. Even if there was any pending danger, there was second senior sister Lu Yanlan, who was also in close cultivation. Although no one could see her on weekdays, her presence still remained. Close cultivation was most appropriate in such a place. He had accumulated enough growth. On the way to Great Sage, he had completed the transformation of the soul. In other words, he had completed the qualitative change that was most difficult to the others. What remained was the accumulation part. Now, as long as sufficient accumulation was achieved, the breakthrough would happen naturally. He had now reached the peak of the half-step Great Sage Amateur. After absorbing the spiritual energy left in the dragon vein for many years, his body was like a well with countless spring water pouring in, reaching a saturated state in an instant. It was the time to grow further and improve the power realm. Only with the increase in capacity could allow him to continue further his cultivation. This was why, despite Yi Shiwen completing the process of qualitative change, he was still unable to step into the Great Sage, and must continue the accumulating process. Stepping into Great Sage was a process of both quantitative change and qualitative change. Most people first perform quantitative change. When the quantitative change reached a certain level, qualitative change would naturally occur. However, Yi Shiwen was completely the opposite. The process of qualitative change came first. He would utilize the qualitative change to bring upon quantitative change, completely the opposite of others. It rendered his pathway much more difficult. But fortunately, Yi Shiwen had used the tremendous pressure in that special space to resolve the issue beforehand. Otherwise, his practice must not be so smooth now. But even so, breaking through to half-step Great Sage Adept was also a huge test for him. It was not so easy. The realm barrier was like a dam. With water constant dripping wears away stone. It was supposed to wear down the dam slowly. Yi Shiwen had just attained the half-step Great Sage Amateur not long ago. Soon he would attain half-step Great Sage Adept, which meant that there were still some impurities residues that were not cleaned up previously. It was more difficult to break through in a hurry, and it would not be easy. Yi Shiwen sat in the secret room, rested and recovered his injuries. After years of battle, Yi Ziwen's body had some hidden injuries. Now he was recovering them little by little. Compared to the previous injuries, these hidden injuries were actually more difficult to recover. 10 days later, he finally completely recovered from the hidden injury on his body. The magic of the Phoenix regeneration technique was great. He knew what these were for. The more amazing the Phoenix regeneration technique was, the more lifespan he would consume. He might appear grand now, but only he knew that his lifespan could not surmount to even 1/3 of the normal half-step Great Sage's life expectancy. It was a lifespan worth hundreds of years. Ordinary people most likely were not bold enough to practice the Phoenix regeneration technique. But for Yi Shiwen it was nothing. Without the Phoenix regeneration technique, he would have died a long time ago with his corpse laying cold for a long time. The injury that was previously bombarded by Nyahan at least wasted more than 100 years of his life. The lifespan of 100 years. Yi Shiwen gritted his teeth over it. Although it was not an unacceptable price with 2,000 years of lifespan as someone in the Great Sage realm, the problem was that he had not lived 100 years. Having 100 years worth of lifespan missing was inexplicable. He could not help but feel heartache. When thinking of this, Yi Ziwen's murderous intention could not be hidden at all. This Nyahan pushed him to such a point that he suffered heavy losses. How could he not hate it, and lost 100 years of life? Although he didn't know that Nyahan suffered heavy losses, and inevitably took a step back in cultivation later on with the loss was no less than him, he still remembered this grudge. Demon-worshipping religion, soul destruction temple Nyahan. Sooner or later, I will have revenge. No matter how fast his cultivation progressed, he could only break through in cultivation little by little. He didn't know, the outside world already went crazy because of his affairs. In this boundless starry sky world, once there was a great sage in any place, it would be something worthy of celebration, and could shake one side of the world. Even in some remote places, great sage would be the lord of a place. Although great sage was not very rare in true martial school, Any great sage appearance was enough to command real martial realm. There was no exaggeration at all. In the real martial realm, they were basically in a state of hostility to each other, and they were very concerned about each other's talent. So once the talent appears, it would quickly shock the entire real martial realm. Although Yi Shiwen did not advance into the great sage, his strength was impressive. He slayed the great sage amateur Tianjiao and escaped from the soul destruction temple master. This strength was no less than the average great sage, since even the characters off the great sage amateur were not likely to accomplish such feat. His performance was no different from that of a great sage, and many people even regard him as a great sage already. Therefore, this news could cause such a shock. As time went by day, this matter did not slowly drown over time, but had become more and more intense. It was because after the story of Yi Shiwen killing Lao Yi spread, soon the top master of Emergent School came to real martial realm, and came straight to true martial school. They had pinpointed and demanded to take Yi Shiwen away. Otherwise true martial school would be at its own risk. This news suddenly caused a great uproar in true martial school. Although true martial school declined for a long time, its ability to monopolize the vast area of the southern region was an apparent symbol of its strength and heritage. True martial school was the lord in real martial realm all the while. No one should underestimate true martial school. True martial school was the side bullying others all the while. How could anyone persecute true martial school? However, in the past decades, as many forces had entered the real martial realm one by one, they had extended their power into the real martial realm. The situation in real martial realm was getting more and more complicated. It was like a huge vortex. One could be involved and got crushed in an accident. In particular, Emergent School was a terrible behemoth in the depths of the starry sky, which could be compared with the true martial school in the peak period. No one could ignore such behemoth's will. In the face of the blame from Emergent School masters, countless disciples came into discussions. Although they had such experience last time when Yi Shiwen beheaded sons of nobility, there were blames and pressure from Emergent School. At that time, no one really took it to heart. It was merely the death of a half-step great sage. There was no big deal in it. In this demon realm trial, the half-step great sage that died from all sides of real martial realm were numerous times in masses. Half-step great sage, in the eyes of the entire huge battalion, was nothing at all. But now it was a great sage. They had heavyweight even in Emergent School. Not to mention a Tianjiao who had just broken through to great sage. He carried more weight than the elder great sage. But this was not the thing that countless people cared about the most. Although the death of a great sage was enough to shake one side, it was not enough to make two behemoths fight each other. The reason for the possible severe collision was only one. They really wanted to invade real martial realm. Over the years, these behemoths from the depths of the starry sky had continuously shoved their power into real martial realm. It was already apparent in their intention. No matter what reason they had to join the real martial realm, but the truth was they had a great ambition to invade real martial realm. This matter was likely to be an excuse. An excuse for Emergent School to intervene in real martial realm. A great sage was still far from having the weight to trigger the desperate fight between the two forces, but it was enough to serve as an excuse. Therefore, many people were concerned. If Emergent School used this as an excuse to invade true martial school, then who could prevent these masters from invading? In fact, the Emergent School could compete with the peak of true martial school. Therefore, these people advocated surrendering Yi Shiwen in order to quell the anger of Emergent School. The most unfortunate thing was that they could not find an excuse to not invade. However, some radical right-wings felt that they must not compromise now. Since there was no use to compromise, these Emergent School people were obviously eager to invade real martial realm. There was no difference between excuses and no excuses. There would be war in the end anyway, thus having no point to trouble their own disciple. Since the people at Emergent School wanted to wage war, then they could only greet each other with fist. In this controversy, time passed by quickly. Another year had passed. During this year, because of the persecution of the Emergent School, things regarding Yi Shiwen that should have died down were still heating up. Yi Shiwen, who was in the secret room, didn't know anything about the outside world. He had closed cultivation in the Tibetan Star Summit. He didn't need to set up vigilance on the outside world, but focus entirely to break through. He had finally reached the most critical moment. The thick realm barrier was finally about to be broken. No one knew how long it had been, but Yishuan opened his eyes suddenly, and two brilliant rays shot out. The aura on his body was finally not capped and stagnant, but it escalated all the way limitlessly. Yishuan exhaled. I have finally attained half-step Great Sage Adept. Chapter 662. His body was shrouded with golden light. Behind him, the Mingxin ancient trees shuddered with mighty power. It continuously emitted grass and wood fragrance. Once a person inhaled it, he would immediately become sober. Even if he was stuck in a stagnant close cultivation, the fragrance could maintain their soul and keep their spirit sober, which had an unimaginable effect on enlightenment. A pair of wings behind him spread out with full force, and the enclosed room seemed to turn into a cosmic starry sky. A few dragon roars arose from his body. A cloud of fire was boiling over his head, as if he wanted to enclose the entire chamber. Now, Yi Zaiwen's body was surrounded with weird phenomena. When he broke through into the half-step Great Sage Intermediate, many of his martial arts were manifested at once, as if in congratulations to Yi Zaiwen's breakthrough in power realm. As Yi Zaiwen's skills became more profound, these martial arts lost techniques had already shown signs of further transformation, to become more powerful without much practice. Yi Shiwen sorted out many martial arts he acquired. In the early days, he practiced something like eloping thunder with 9 echoes, which had become useless for a long time. The martial arts he created anytime now were much more powerful than eloping thunder with 9 echoes. In addition, another one of it would be coiled dragon palm. The first martial art of adequate quality that he got. Cultivation of this martial art was difficult. The process was still fresh in his memory. He learned through it step by step slowly with each individual move at a time. He used it every time as though it was his ultimate move. For Yi Shiwen in the early days, it played a supreme role. At this point in time, Yi Shiwen had already noticed coiled dragon palm was a great sage grade martial art. It was most likely left over and created by a great sage. Despite it being merely an aura, this martial art was impossible to be comprehended fully due to the Mountain Qingfeng sect's strength in the past. Yi Shiwen was relying on that mysterious space to prevent himself from getting killed by the aura. At first he regarded it as an innate martial art, but now it seemed like a great mistake. On the other hand, he possessed other arts such as the Thousand Starlord Fist, Shattered Star Fist and Sky Collapsing Fire Cloud Hand. All of them basically surpassed the Great Sage Realm martial arts and Transcendent Realm martial arts. Indeed, Yi Shiwen already learnt from Yi Mo that after he escalated from the Great Sage Realm, it would be Transcendent Realm. From the Sage Realm, there were signs of transcendence. The meaning of the sage was a creature that surpasses mortals. The Sage Realm first undergoes physical transformation. When it comes to the Great Sage, it will be the soul and spirit transformation. They are fundamentally different from the average people. It is true transcendence after the next breakthrough. This is the so-called transcendence. The ancient people emphasized longevity. This thing that only existed in legends really happens to them. These transcended powerhouses were the real longevity without boundaries. Great Sage only had a lifespan of 5,000 years. Transcendence would have a lifespan of 10,000 years, flaunting the terrible strength of transcendence powerhouses. Why were these powerhouses difficult to be messed with? No one would be willing to drive these powerhouses to a dead end when it was not at a critical moment. It was because it would be very likely to draw out old monsters from close cultivation. They were like living fossils. For example, when the Yuan sect fell into desperation, there was an old master appearing out of the blue. Such a thing was not uncommon among those with deep inner knowledge in the sect. People who had reached the transcendence level had almost reached the peak of the starry sky world, and truly surpass all beings. So Nyehan was crazy when he knew that a distinguished character in Demon World was willing to give empowerment to him as a reward. In his opinion, it was worth it to pay a huge price to kill Yi Shiwen. Although he paid a huge price, his cultivation would be able to make rapid progress after getting huge empowerment in the future. Such a distinguished character was rare since ancient times. They were truly a behemoth. Only the transcendent powerhouse could get into a great force at true martial school. Inside true martial school, only those who had surpassed the transcendence were eligible to compete for the names of the top 10 legatees. This was not only a good name, but the resources distribution of the top 10 legatees were also far superior and further one-sided. It was beyond the imagination of ordinary people, surpassing the top hundreds of legatees. The martial arts created by such masters were naturally tyrannical. Even if Yi Shiwen truly broke into the transcendence, he could also exert a great power. At present, Yi Ziwen's main art, Shattered Star Fist, was even more powerful. Demon's Wings and Phoenix Regeneration Technique. Even if in Yi Ziwen's current cultivation, he couldn't see their level. The only thing that Yi Shiwen could be sure of was that they were far beyond the Great Sage realm, and even beyond Transcendence realm. The Phoenix Regeneration Technique was originally obtained on Thousands Demon Beasts Island. Yi Shiwen did not know the specific level of magical power, but Demon's Wings was taught by Yi Mo. It was said that it was the lost technique created by the demon. Although Yi Shiwen did not have a specific idea on how powerful the demon was, Yi Mo said earlier that one lance was enough to destroy a world. Yi Shiwen firmly remembered it. Hence, the lost technique created by such a character should be unfathomable. Yi Shiwen only comprehended the surface and such great power were released. In the same realm, his speed was invincible. Even those great sages could not catch up to his speed. Among these martial arts, Yi Shiwen was already able to manifest the full power of the coiled dragon palm. In other words, he had fully tapped out all the potential of the coiled dragon palm. Unless he could figure out the next part of the martial art and continue to push it to its perfection, otherwise there would not be a huge breakthrough. No matter how skilled he was, it was just a martial art at the Great Sage level. When he broke through to the half-step Great Sage Intermediate, many of his martial arts resonated in his body. He also evolved, becoming more powerful. It was a breakthrough with no need to cultivate. It seemed like a doctor working on a primary school student's subject. Even if they had not done it, they can quickly understand it. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes slowly. His eyes flickered brightly. Within this year, he did not only break through in cultivation but also constantly figuring out these martial arts. Although his previous accumulation was enough, after all, he had to break through to half-step Great Sage Intermediate. In addition, deducing the essence of these martial arts had also cost him 80 million elixir. The elixir on him was basically not enough. There was only 100 million elixirs left. For him who had a huge demand now, it was basically the same as being poor. Fortunately, he plundered the wealth of many experts previously. Some of them were consumed by him in the form of elixirs, but most of them had some special medicinal materials, or some other magical materials. Yi Shiwen guessed that if he sold all of them, he could at least earn 2 billion. However, after the sale, he was really destitute and had nothing. Although he consumed a lot of elixirs, his strength had improved more significantly. Overall, it was still very cost-effective. After breaking through to the half-step Great Sage Intermediate, his strength could basically counter the Great Sage Intermediate. After cooperating with Tianyuan Mirror, Great Sage Intermediate would be unmatched to him. However, the Star Beast avatar had not made much obvious progress. The duration of 1 year was still too short. The Blood Slaves had not absorbed the Star Beast spirit. There was no way to form a qualitative breakthrough. Naturally, there was no way to mobilize Star Beast Avatar's power. However, Yi Shiwen was confident that the Star Beast Avatar could reach the Great Sage Peak without any problem as long as he had enough time. By that time, he would be among the top powers under the stars. He could be truly fearless as long as he did not encounter the Transcendence Masters. Even if he really encountered a Transcendence Master, he could still fight with him since he had had the physical body of the Star Beast and various talented powers. At the very least he could protect himself to a certain extent. Now that I have consumed these elixirs, I can only sell those raw materials. Yi Shiwen sighed and found that no matter when, his wealth was never enough. Indeed, he cultivated 100 times faster than ordinary people, but the wealth he spent for this was 100 times that of ordinary people, or even more. No, Yi Shiwen. In fact, you have a better option. You should refine those herbs into pellets and sell them. Yemo suggested. Yi Shiwen finally remembered that he still had the identity of an alchemy master, but he had not forgotten that approach. It was because the wealth consumed by his own cultivation was already an astronomical figure, and the alchemy master role was more inferior than him. They all use pellets to enlighten themselves. They must continue their alchemy, mastering all kinds of pellets recipe, and continue to make breakthroughs. However, whether it was the raw materials of alchemy or various ancient pellet recipes, it would not come for me. They needed wealth to buy them, which was also an astronomical figure. Hence, those alchemy masters might seem rich after selling a lot of pellets. In fact, this was not the case. Unless they were satisfied with their status quo. As long as they wanted to cultivate, they would need to constantly invest. So those alchemy masters often didn't have much money. However, Yi Shiwen was stronger than those alchemy masters in raw materials aspect. All of them were almost from plundering the enemy's wealth, which was a cost-free business. Although he did not plan to go down the road of alchemy to the end, alchemy still made money, a lot of money. And that's a good idea. Yi Shiwen nodded. Didn't you refine Tai Huang Pasheng Dan in the past? You can refine it now and sell it. Chapter 663. Haven't you refined Tai Huang Pasheng Dan before? You can refine it now and sell it. Yemo suggested. Yi Shiwen immediately remembered that when he entered Sage Realm in order to break through, he was begging around to collect raw materials to make Tai Huang Pasheng Dan. He was even stopped by the law enforcement staff and got scammed, forcing him to accept Beta's mission to Meteor World. But that was a matter of decades ago. Yi Shiwen almost forgot about it. Once Yemo mentioned it, Yi Shiwen suddenly felt that this was indeed a great method. 20 years ago, Yi Shiwen was just a half-sage. Compared with the current strength, it was a difference in a power realm for Yi Shiwen. It was simply not the same. For him at that time, refining a Tai Huang Pasheng Dan was also something that needed to be careful and cautious. Just refining the raw materials of Tai Huang Pasheng Dan made him crazy already. But now he was completely different from the situation at that time. With his current strength, he could even beat Great Sage alive to death. His strength grew multiple folds, showing a vast difference in level. For him in the past, refining Tai Huang Pasheng Dan was difficult. But it was just a piece of cake for now. Of course, that was just because he had a mysterious space and Yemo used Tianyuan Mirror to help him. With that mysterious space to help him, he could accurately deduce what to do at each step. Even if he didn't practice it a few times, as long as he was willing to spend elixir to complete the deduction process, he could quickly attain mastery as though he had refined it countless times. Just like a precision machine, continuously refining it according to standard procedures. Ordinary alchemists, even masters of Sage Realm, found it difficult to make a standard grade pellet, such as Tai Huang Pasheng Dan. It was safe to say that there was a considerable chance of failure, and the probability of success would not be high. After all, they were not machines, and their experience could only be accumulated through continuous failure or success. In the process, the wealth they need to consume could make them directly bankrupt. Therefore, alchemy teachers often rely on a certain powerful force, or simply found a large force themselves. For example, the Alchemists Association was found in this situation. This was the case for ordinary pellets, not to mention the standard grade pellets. For many alchemists who were recently promoted to Alchemy Master, they were only considered entering the ranks of Alchemy Master when they refined a standard grade pellet. However, for many people concerned, they could only refine a standard grade pellet out of sheer chance. They would not be able to refine it the next time. In this case, even though the pellets produced by the alchemists were profitable, the alchemists themselves were quite poor. This was because the wealth they spent to explore the pellet recipe was also an astronomical figure. But Yi Shiwen was the exception. Failure? That was not in his consideration. Even if he failed occasionally, it was not a big deal. As long as he could ensure that most of them could be refined successfully, then the remaining failures would be nothing. Profits would still come to him in abundance. For one Tai Huang Pasheng Dan, you can sell it for 10 million elixir. 10 of them are worth 100 million elixirs. Hence, 100 of them will be 1 billion. Yi Mo said with a little excitement. Anyway, this was indeed a great way to make money. It was also true for alchemists. Of course, the premise was that one should not throw all the limited wealth that was earned into exploring the black hole of finding new pellet recipes. It was something that couldn't be achieved in one's lifetime. One Tai Huang Pasheng Dan needed materials worth approximately 3 million elixir materials, and the profits had exceeded 300%. Generally, alchemists would also need to consider the failure rate and other factors, so the actual profit was not in such scale. But for Yi Shiwen, failure rate was out of consideration. The demand for Tai Huang Pasheng Dan in the market was apparent from the number of people in legendary realms. In the true martial school alone, there were more than dozens of millions of legendary. Even if the warriors in legendary peak were less than 100th or 1,000th of the previous figure, it was also a very large quantity. What's more, the legendary masters in the entire real martial domain, and the demand of legendary warriors in various worlds in the sky could be said to be endless. As long as legendary masters could not break through into Sage Realm, this Tai Huang Pasheng Dan would always have a demand in the market. Never worry about selling it. There was a great threshold between Legendary Realm and Sage Realm. It was the first level that mortals faced to break through the mortal shell. The legend that could attain Sage Realm was less than even 100th. It was evident when Yi Shiwen had to use Tai Huang Pasheng Dan potency too. Thinking of this, Yi Ziwen's eyes suddenly flashed. He didn't even need to be an alchemist to refine other pellets. He could attain great riches by only relying on Tai Huang Pasheng Dan. Among the alchemists, those like Yi Shiwen who could only create one or a few of pellets such as Taylor Pasheng Dan standard pellet were extremely rare. In fact, it was approaching non-existent. For alchemists, they could only refine standard grade pellets after refining many pellets and mastering many pellet recipes. Yi Shiwen was definitely a monster and odd being. For Yi Shiwen, this was definitely a constant source of wealth. After he was promoted into Great Sage in the future, the required wealth was even more astronomical. Most likely, the Tai Huang Pasheng Dan could not provide for it. After all, he could not afford to dwell in alchemy all the time. However, this matter could be left for a lot more later. For Tai Huang Pasheng Dan, it was a sweet summer dew that came in time for him. After thinking about the solution, Yi Shiwen was in a good mood for a while. After retrieving many phenomena around him, he walked straight out of the close cultivation secret room. When he was out of the close cultivation, he only heard about the news that the whole true martial school was full of excitement because of his affairs. The excitement didn't die down even after a year. Under the explanations of two brothers and sisters, Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin, Yi Shiwen learnt that the master of Emergence School had threatened the master of True Martial School to surrender Yi Shiwen. Otherwise, the consequences would be at their own risk. However, the executives of True Martial School threw a tough attitude, saying that it was absolutely impossible to surrender their disciple. They had seen through the intent of the Emergence School. This was just an excuse. In the end, they still wanted to fully intervene in the real martial domain, whether it was earlier or later. Yi Shiwen frowned. He had anticipated that Emergence School would find fault on this. After all, Emergence School's ambitions for real martial domain were almost everyone's knowledge. Now it was just an excuse. Lao Yi's death was a great excuse. Even Lao Yi made the first move on Yi Shiwen and Yi Shiwen had the right reasoning. Speaking of it was still useless. No one cared about such things. No matter whether the final result was that Lao Yi was dead or Yi Shiwen was dead, there was no difference. It didn't matter to Emergence School. They only needed one excuse or a fuse, and Yi Shiwen knew it clearly. He even thought about escaping. If True Martial School did not choose to protect him in the end, he would not just surrender to his fate. There was no other way than escaping. The most worrying thing was to involve parents and relatives. Now seeing the worst situation didn't happen, the school chose to protect him in the end. But he still understood that the wording, "not surrounding my disciple," were all nonsense. If he was just an ordinary disciple, he believed that True Martial School would not regret sacrificing the life of an ordinary disciple despite this was just Emergence School's excuse. But as the saying goes, it is better off to be able to hold off for a while. Having more time for better preparation would be great. Now that the school didn't choose to hand him out, They most probably see the potential in him. He was one of a kind since the ancient time. As a half-step great sage, he actually killed a great sage Tianjiao. Yi Shiwen could fully imagine how shocking the senior management was when this news came back. Compared to this record, the previous killing of hundreds of half-step great sage late masters was not worth mentioning at all. It was not at a comparable level. However, since the school did not choose to surrender himself, Yi Shiwen could be at ease for a while. There was a folk saying, when the sky fell, there would be a tall man shouldering it. 1. The pressure on the side of emergence school would be borne under true martial school executive. Master, you are probably going to become a celebrity in the emergence world. But Master, now there is a group of people who are not friendly to you in the academy, jumping up and down, saying that if there is a war, it is because of you. They want to hand you over to calm down the anger of emergence school. Yang Wenjun said with a frown, obviously also quite angry. There were not many Tibetan Star Summit, but each of them was united. They all had a close relationship. Hence, they were really mad when there were such slanders on Yi Shiwen. But those people formed a united force, and he couldn't help it. No worries, senior brother. Those are just some clowns who amount to nothing. Yi Shiwen waved and said calmly. He didn't put those clowns in his heart. There would be people like them in many places. When he was in Great Country didn't he also encounter such people frequently? Those who just want to sacrifice others for a moment of peace. In Yi Ziwen's opinion, such people were nobody that couldn't achieve any great feat. They could not hold any responsibility at all. Even if they know that emergence school just needs an excuse, they would rather be delusional. Indeed, they are just some clowns. Yang Wenjun didn't comment further as he noticed Yi Shiwen wasn't worried about it at all. 1. The most prominent person will be the first person shouldering the disaster or issue. Equals 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 equals. Hi, fellow readers. I'm Jody, who will be manning the translation of this story from now on. Hope you will enjoy it. Please feel free to leave any comment or feedback down below. 3. Chapter 664. Right, senior brother. Is brother by here? Yi Shiwen asked. Sponsored content. Yi Shiwen had abundance of raw materials, exceeding 2 billion elixirs. Even the great sage could not attain this astronomical wealth. Even though Yi Shiwen was never short of resources, this sum was definitely a fortune that he could use for quite a long time. Of course, this was under the premise that Star Beast Avatar was not used. If Star Beast Avatar was used, then no amount of wealth was enough to sustain it, unless his strength could overwhelm Star Beast Avatar. In that case, the situation would become the exact opposite. Generally, alchemists would not sell those materials. Despite the fact that many materials were not very expensive, they were often very difficult to obtain. If they need it at the last minute, they often encounter various problems. Hence, they often chose to sell pellets directly in exchange for wealth. Firstly, they could exchange for more wealth this way. Secondly, they could increase their experience in refining pellets. So why not? Only in the case with informal alchemists like Yi Shiwen would approach it differently. Such a huge fortune for ordinary people. Even the average legatee couldn't buy it all. In true martial school, only the top 100 legatee could have the great sage oversee them. General legatee only had some sage realm great perfection, or half-step great sage to oversee them. However, Tibetan Star Summit obviously did not treat their legatee in such an ordinary manner. The Tibet Star Summit had a very deep heritage. They were one of the top 10 legatees in the past. Such legatee backgrounds were naturally supreme. Over the past few years, they had accumulated a profound strength. Buying his items worth 2 billion possessed no problem at all. It was just a piece of cake. For Yi Shiwen, these magical materials were not very useful. However, for a force who was interested in development and growth, this was not the case. There was a saying, "Don't let your own fertile water flow into others' field." 1. At the same time, Yi Shiwen could also exchange a large amount of medicinal materials needed for refining Tai Huang Pasheng Dan in the Tibetan Star Summit. Although some of these medicinal materials were relatively rare, they were considered nothing for the Tibetan Star Summit's inventory. Yes, but even Brother Bai is in close cultivation recently. The brother said that there may be a big change in the near future. He must break through in order to improve his strength. Yang Wenjun said carefree. What was the strength of Bai Jiansong? Now it had entered the Great Sage Intermediate, approaching the peak. Within a few years, there would be no problem in entering the Great Sage late after another breakthrough. He could most likely join the Profound Realm in the Great Sage within 100 years, entering the rank considered strongest below Transcendent Realm. Sponsored content by Jiansong's demon-like talent was manifested fully at this time. However, he still didn't feel safe with his current cultivation, seeing a need to cultivate and breakthrough. Only after the breakthrough did he have a certain degree of confidence. It was conceivable that this turmoil might far exceed his imagination. Even the Great Sage, who might get involved in it, wouldn't be able to protect themselves. In the past, the southern region under the rule of true martial school was definitely not a peaceful place. The war did not really stop for a moment. However, even if there was any great turbulence, as long as there are those great sages, they could stabilize the situation firmly. Nothing would happen to the point where it would become difficult to clean up. But now Bai Jiansong was not confident. How could Yang Wenjun not be worried? Yi Shiwen frowned. Never mind true martial school. The entire real martial domain appeared as though they were bracing for a storm. The gale is raging and the storm is about to burst. There was a rumbling of wind in true martial world. The intervention of many great forces outside the domain made the situation of the entire real martial domain look even more chaotic. Many people were aware and well prepared, not just Yi Shiwen. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen could not help but take a deep breath and must speed up his pace, lest he be caught off guard when the war suddenly comes. Brother Bai is right. I'm afraid real martial domain won't be in peace. Senior brother and senior sister, you better hurry to enter close cultivation, just in case, said Yi Shiwen. Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin even said this to Yi Shiwen. They couldn't help but worry. They also heard some news, but they didn't believe it. With the strength of true martial school, it shouldn't be a big deal. After all, it had experienced many situations before. Now that Bai Jiansong said it first, and now even Yi Shiwen said it, they couldn't help but get worried about it. Although Yi Shiwen was their mentor, Yi Shiwen's performance had surprised them all in the past decades, with his cultivation far surpassed them. In fact, they did not regard Yi Shiwen as junior in many things. Rather, they see him as a senior brother like Bai Jiansong. Sponsored content. When Yi Shiwen saw Bai Jiansong again, Bai Jiansong just came back from a short close cultivation. It made Yi Shiwen feel a little bit sad. In his impression, the only training madman in the Tibetan Star Summit was his second senior sister Lu Yanlan. The third senior brother, Bai Jiansong, had always been somewhat lazy with a more relaxed and unrestrained character. Leaving him to spend all day in close cultivation was akin to killing him. Now he had frequent close cultivation. You mean you want to sell all of them to the Tibetan Star Summit? Bai Jiansong asked. With the Tibetan Star Sun and Huang Wuji being present, and Lu Yelan being a cultivator, the Tibetan Star Summit's matters had several twists and turns. Basically, Bai Jiansong was in charge. At this time he separated public and private matters clearly, and helped me to convert all of them to the medicinal materials used in alchemy. Yi Shiwen said and took out a list directly, which was the list of medicinal materials needed for refining Tai Huang Pasheng Dan. He thought about it. Instead of doing it himself, it would be better to have Bai Jiansong help in collecting these herbs, which would be much faster. This list is familiar. This is the medicinal material list you were collecting last time, right? Why are there so many this time? Bai Jiansong still remembered the last time Yi Shiwen collected the medicinal materials on the list. The new one was that Yi Shiwen only collected 2 medicinal materials for the sake of conservatism. It was not a big deal, but this time it was replaced with medicinal materials worth 2 billion elixir. Bai Jiansong was also surprised. Yi Shiwen had so much wealth. He didn't anticipate that. Generally, it was normal for Great Sage to have 100 million elixir. Having 1 billion elixir was considered extremely rich. Even if did not have so many, not to mention that once all these medicine materials were to be traded, it was worth as many as 2 billion. This wealth was an astronomical figure. If these elixirs were traded for these medicinal materials, how many pellets could be refined? Even taking into consideration the failure rate, this batch of pellets wouldn't be a small number. Senior brother does have a good memory. It's indeed the previous pellet recipe. Junior brother is referring to that. Yi Shiwen said with a smile. Bai Jiansong didn't ask any more. Yi Shiwen thoughtfully put all these great materials into the Tibetan Star Summit's treasury. Soon Yi Shiwen got 50 copies of Tai Huang Pasheng Dan's medicinal materials from Bai Jiansong. Some of these medicinal materials were relatively remote. Even the Tibetan Star Summit could not collect them all of a sudden, but Bai Jiansong would take charge on it. Sponsored content. Yi Shiwen exchanged these raw materials for 700 copies of Tai Huang Pasheng Dan's materials, and the remaining 600 Tai Huang Pasheng Dans would be sent over after they finished collecting them. Those things did not require Bai Jiansong to take personal responsibility. Although the Tibetan Star Summit had few disciples, there were still many peripheral members. Many people relied on the Tibetan Star Summit to live. After getting these 50 copies of Tai Huang Pasheng Dan, Yi Shiwen immediately started a closed refining pellets process again. Inside the secret room, Yi Shiwen sat on the futon with golden rays shone around him. In his body, the mysterious space burst with unimaginable colorful light, constantly deducing Tai Huang Pasheng Dan's pellet recipe. Above Yi Shiwen, a blood-colored mirror floated in the sky, boiling. Bloody ray almost filled the entire basement. Yi Shiwen didn't rush into alchemy first, but started preparing the refiner first. In front of him, a group of unknown minerals were melted into a group of liquids. The hot flames were continuously burning underneath, refining those impurities out. A sacred artifact in the shape of a pellet furnace appeared in front of Yi Shiwen, which turned out to be a sacred artifact. In fact, after Sage Realm, many sage would collect various sacred materials everywhere. The materials that could be used to make sacred artifacts were uncommon. At least for many Sage Realm initial warriors, it was difficult to collect them. Refining a fated holy tool was quite important for Sage Realm masters, which could add a considerable part of strength. It was just that Yi Shiwen did not need to refine other holy artifacts because of Yi Mo's existence, but this did not mean that he had no ability to refine it. With his current strength, as long as the materials were sufficient, it was simply a piece of cake to refine a holy weapon. When he performed alchemy, he needed an alchemy furnace. The previous alchemy furnace was just a magical tool. After the last refining of Tai Huang Pasheng Dan, it exploded directly. To make this kind of standard-grade pellets, it was naturally best to have an alchemy furnace of the Great Sage class, but Yi Shiwen had not possessed such strength. It was very tough for him already just to upgrade his Tianyuan mirrors. However, the holy tool was also barely usable. Luckily, it still wasn't a big deal. If a workman wants to do his best, he must first sharpen his weapon. How can Yi Shiwen not know this? Soon, under the refining of Yi Shiwen, a holy alchemy furnace gradually took shape and appeared in the air. Yi Shiwen breathed a sigh of relief. The alchemy furnace in front of him was completely formed and fell to the ground. Although he was confident for a long time, it was his first time making a holy tool. With scripture in his hand, he used his qi. Under the alchemy furnace, the purest alchemy flames rose in waves. Yi Shiwen then quickly poured another medicinal material into it. Don't let the benefits reap by other party not from your side. Note: please download the sponsors game to support us. Chapter 665. Successful Pellets Refining. Sponsored content. Moon Peach Skin. Moon Fairy Fruit. Yi Shiwen threw numerous familiar and unfamiliar herbs into the alchemy furnace in order, while he carefully controlled the fire. Yi Shiwen staring at the alchemy furnace in great concentration with a pair of dark and profound eyes. There were endless alchemy flames boiling and flutter. He carefully controlled the temperature of the flame, and compared it with the data in his mind. He didn't dare to make any slight mistake. There was already a lot of information about Tai Huang Pasheng Dan in his mind, and it was not the first time he refined Tai Huang Pasheng Dan. Therefore, he was experienced in this refining process, basically nothing difficult about it. If at this time an alchemist saw Yi Shiwen's work, he would probably be surprised and drop his jaws widely. Yi Shiwen's works were smooth and natural. Each movement seemed to be a textbook-like standard, and it was almost technical. Sponsored content in Tai Huang Pasheng Dan's refining, it had almost reached the most perfect point. Previously, when Yi Shiwen refined Tai Huang Pasheng Dan, he had to exhaust all his strength. Back then, he would use up all his qi to control the alchemy flame magnitude, so that it would not explode directly. But now, his skill definitely grew stronger than the past, rendering the refining process to be less challenging. Although the flame grew stronger due to the need to refine pellets in a short time, it was all under Yi Shiwen's control. Within an hour, the rumbling noises from the alchemy furnace echoed in the basement. In that instant, the basement was filled with the medicine scent. Yi Shiwen waved his hand, the cover of the holy tool flew up, and an orange-yellow pellet appeared. In front of Yi Shiwen, the medicine was overflowing with a pale yellow luster with a faint trace of tau in it. A faint smile crept upon Yi Shiwen's face. Tai Huang Pasheng Dan refining was successful this time. The so-called standard grade medicine was divided into 3 levels: heaven, earth, and man. Each level was divided into 9 grades. Hence, there were a total of 27 grades. What lay beyond it was the almighty pellets which no one saw before. Legend says that the almighty pellets by its nature could activate a person's qi wisdom. Once the qi wisdom was born, punishment would fall from heaven. After overcoming it, one could turn into a distinct martial warrior. But the information still came off messy. Some said you could turn into a demon. Some said Tai Huang Pasheng Dan was a level 1 man grade, claiming that they were the lowest among the standard grade pellets. However, for those powerful martial warriors, only standard grade pellets could be regarded as real pellets. Non-standard grade pellets were useless to them since they had little effect, especially to those who had attained the sage realm. However, standard grade pellets couldn't be refined easily. Hence, alchemists were quite welcomed in the starry sky. Almost every force would train up their own alchemists. Although the alchemists in the Alchemists Association were powerful, their overall number right now was in fact not the entire headcount of alchemists. Outside the Alchemists Association, there were also a large number of alchemists that were not linked to the Alchemists Association. This time, Yi Shiwen just simply made his first attempt. After it was successful, Yi Shiwen did not hesitate any further. He immediately poured 10 more materials into it, intending to refine 10 pellets at one time. However, the truth was being able to successfully refine 1 pellet did not mean that he could successfully refine 10 pellets at once. After covering the top of the alchemy furnace, Yi Shiwen squeezed the engraved scripture and raised the flame, making it more violent than before. It had almost completely surrounded the entire alchemy furnace. The entire closed cultivation basement was quiet. Only the crackling sound of alchemy fire could be heard. But it was seemingly burnt. 2 hours passed by quickly. Yi Shiwen frowned, and kept changing the engraved scripture in his hand. However, there were no changes in the alchemy furnace. The alchemy fire was not substantial to support the refining of 10 pellets in one go. In this case, once the duration dragged 10 times more than how it would usually take, or possibly even longer time, it would be a loss. Yi Shiwen didn't want that to happen. Sponsored content. Yi Shiwen opened his mouth widely, and poured out the qi from his body. All of it rushed into the flame. With the addition of qi support, the flame came into a higher boiling point with a redoubled power. In that instant, the fiery flame turned white, which looked beautiful in the distance. But Yi Shiwen knew that such a flame was the most terrible. It was a phenomena that would only appear after the temperature had reached a certain level. It was necessary for the alchemy fire to reach a supreme temperature. Otherwise, the pellet refining process would end up in failure. Moreover, the control on alchemy fire temperature was still demanding in addition to the high temperature. It should not be too high or too low, so it would need to be pinpoint accurate, almost like a computer. Even the slightest mistake could not be made. This was a huge test for others. However, it was a piece of cake for Yi Shiwen. With the help of mysterious space, he would almost become an accurate computing computer when he was performing alchemy. Bang! With a loud noise, the lid of the alchemy furnace was suddenly opened. 10 orange pellets flew into Yi Shiwen's hands. Yi Shiwen was immediately very excited, grinning, and suddenly put 10 pellets worth of medicinal materials into the alchemy furnace. His eyes glowed. In his eyes, these pellets were not pellets at all, but elixir. Although he didn't need Tai Huang Pasheng Dan now, the pellet could get countless wealth for him. How could he not be excited? As he had just successfully made 10 pellets at a time, it could be converted into 100 million elixirs. For the half-step great sage, it was already an astronomical wealth. This was just the beginning. There would be a total of 700 pellets. If they were successfully refined, it would be the wealth worth 7 billion elixir. With so much wealth, Yi Shiwen grew more excited the more he thought about it. What an astronomical figure. Even though he used to calculate in billions, the wealth of 7 billion elixir was still a huge amount to him. Sponsored content, at least for those in Great Sage Realm, there was no problem at all. For ordinary people, they didn't need to be so anxious. From half-step Great Sage to Great Sage, it would take hundreds of years if it was a relatively longer period, but short decades if it was a relatively shorter period. Many people could not break through this time limit in life. They would achieve it over time as they slowly took off, but the current situation made Yi Shiwen nervous and made him understand that he didn't have that much time to wait. Then his cultivation was rapid. He had completed the qualitative change, and the rest was the quantitative change, which was much easier than ordinary people. Since it was feasible to refine 10 pellets altogether, Yi Shiwen did not hesitate and began to sink into the alchemy. Time flies. 3 days had passed. At the Tibetan Star Summit, a green shadow appeared on the hillside. It was Yi Shiwen. In 3 days, he finally refined the 50 copies of Tai Huang Pasheng Dan without any waste. He didn't feel anything, because since he started to learn alchemy, it had come off easily. There was basically no possibility of failure, but if such a success rate were to spread, it would scare a large number of people to death. Everyone knows that being an alchemist was very difficult. The failure rate was a headache. Even the most successful alchemy division only managed to control the failure rate to a substantially lower level. It could not be completely eliminated. Yi Shiwen not only had 100% success rate, but it was on standard grade pellets rather than ordinary pellets. 50 Tai Huang Pasheng Dan in hand is equivalent to holding 500 million elixir in hand, which is also a huge amount of wealth. At this time, the Tibetan Star Summit was empty. Bai Jiansong, Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin also entered a close cultivation, especially Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin. After listening to the words of Bai Jiansong and Yi Shiwen, they began to fully focus on close cultivation. As for the medicinal materials required by Yi Shiwen, after the collection was completed, there would naturally be people from outside the Tibetan Star Summit to send them without delay. After Yi Shiwen refined all 50 pellets and saw that they hadn't delivered them, he knew that it would take a while to collect these medicinal materials. Otherwise, Yi Shiwen would not have much difficulty collecting them at half-step sage. In some cases, wealth couldn't solve the problem. So many forces were constantly collecting all kinds of medicinal materials and sacred materials, so that they could be used in this critical time. Immediately, Yi Shiwen decided not to wait any longer, but to sell the 50 Tai Huang Pasheng Dan first and test the market's reaction. He knew it would be quite demanding since many people were stuck in the barrier between legend and the Great Sage Realm. How could there be no demand? As for the efficacy, Yi Shiwen was also very confident. At the time, Yi Shiwen's Sage Realm barrier was so sturdy with a lot of accumulation needed. But he still managed to push through it. In this world, would anyone have a Sage Realm barrier stronger than him? After the decision was made, Yi Shiwen changed into the clothes of the Beidou organization, put on the mask of Kong Jinlong, and immediately became Beidou Kong Jinlong. Beidou was not very well known in this starry sky. His character was considered hidden and not really transparent. It was better than him to go out. Right now he had many enemies in the world. Never mind, he had slaughtered hundreds of future Great Sage talents and late half-step Great Sage masters in various real martial domains powerhouses. Even demon-worshipping religion would send a lot of people who desired to break into the transcendent realm to hunt him down after knowing that he was still alive. Most probably, even some old monsters who were in close cultivation for a long time might appear. There were many masters of the emergence school, who were also desperate and held great grudges against him. Note: please download the sponsors game to support us. Chapter 666. A big business sponsored content. Although these people come from different forces and have different purposes, they obviously directed enmity toward him. As long as he dared to come out of true martial school, he would most likely face the pursuit of many masters of various forces. Although he was arrogant and able to compete with the great sage intermediate masters, the opponent would obviously make special preparation after he killed the great sage initial Tianjiao Lao Yi and escaped the series of things from the Soul Destruction Temple Master. It was impossible for them to obediently send the great sage intermediate masters to die. They would definitely send more powerful masters. Especially demon-worshipping religion, great sage intermediate masters would be sent directly, especially for those wanting to break into the transcendent realm. This was the best opportunity and the easiest way. They could get empowerment as long as they killed Yi Shiwen. And even if it was just the great sage intermediate, it was still a huge threat to Yi Shiwen. He could only contend against the great sage intermediate. He was far from being able to eliminate the great sage intermediate masters. So if they just send a few more great sage intermediate masters, he could only flee. Once a character like Soul Destruction Temple Master appeared, his life would be in threat. Although he had entered the half-step Great Sage Intermediate, he had not become stronger in front of a character like Nyahan. When a weak ant becomes a slightly stronger ant, they would still be hunted and killed. Yi Shiwen was bold and not lacking in courage, but he was not stupid. If he left the true martial school boldly, that would be a dead end. Disguising as Kang Jinlong would be completely different. He could avoid detection from other forces. It wouldn't possess too much of a problem even if someone really knew Beida's secret. When he joined Beidou at first, he had a somewhat indifferent attitude, and did not feel that there could be any changes in joining Beidou. After all, the rules of Beidou were too loose. Basically, there was no difference between joining and not joining. As long as he didn't want to, then nothing had to be done with no pressure coming in. Sponsored content. He just didn't expect that there were still rooms for maneuver. Yi Shiwen changed into the clothes of Kang Jinlong, and went straight out of true martial school. He did not alarm anyone. With his agile speed, it only took a brief moment before he left true martial school, and went straight to a place in the southern area. This place was no other than Thousand's Treasure Pagoda in the southern region. Since the rise of Thousand's Treasure Pagoda, it became well known to the world in merely a few decades. His branch also quickly opened throughout the real martial domain. In the major cities of the real martial domain, there were branches of Thousand's Treasures Pagoda. Among these branches, there were some relatively larger and some smaller. Across all regions, there was a large branch to manage all Thousand's Treasures Pagoda affairs. No one really knows where the headquarters of Thousand's Treasure Pagoda was. Despite Thousand's Treasure Pagoda entering the public's attention in a few decades, no one had so far succeeded finding the Thousand's Treasure Pagoda's founding place, and the person behind Thousand's Treasure Pagoda, even with countless people participating in the process. There was a Thousand's Treasure Pagoda branch in the capital of the Great Ming Empire located in the southern region. It was seemingly built overnight. No one knew how it all happened as it just popped out of nowhere in a single night. Yi Shiwen strolled around the imperial capital. It was bustling with traffic. In the imperial capital, it was filled with people with cultivation. Any passerby would at least be Hotian 6th level cultivation. Xiantian masters could be found at a simple glance. Even the truth masters were not uncommon, with a few of them passing by occasionally. People around were not surprised with Yi Shiwen's strange costume. It seemed that because they dwelled in the capital, they had a border horizon, and found it not surprising at all. Yi Shiwen threw his senses out, and the various layouts in the city were clear at a glance. With his profound cultivation, although there were various arrays in the capital of the Great Ming Empire, how could that prevent his senses getting spread out? He got a clear picture of this place in an instant. In the entire imperial capital, there were many legend masters and half-step sage masters. Even in the Forbidden City where the emperor lived, there were many sage realm masters lurking, all wearing bright yellow dragon robes. Sponsored content. Yi Shiwen suddenly realized that these were all emperors of the Great Ming Empire. After being emperors for 100 years, these people had to abdicate and become a retired emperor, and conduct hidden cultivation. This was also the rule of most empires. Otherwise, there were no ways for the dynasties to alternate. Yi Ziwine couldn't help but let out a sigh. It seemed the rumor claimed there was a great sage behind several major empires in this southern region was not wrong. Just look at these sage realm retired emperors. However, these great sages were also disciples in true martial school. Otherwise, how could true martial school allow forces under the eyelids that were not under their control to appear? In other words, the seemingly chaotic southern territory was actually completely in the hands of true martial school. Although there were several major empires in constant conflict, there was rarely a real battle that eliminated the entire empire, unless the great sage behind them was killed unexpectedly. It was also possible that they died of old age. On the contrary, true martial school could utilize the conflicts between these major empires to hone their disciple, and use this as a trial mission. There was no shortcoming to it. The Great Ming Empire lived up as one of the several major empires in the southern region. The cultivation of people here far exceeded that of the Great Yu Empire. At the time, there was no such scene in the Great Yu Empire's capital where all civilians were in cultivation. The soldiers of the Great Ming Empire were not ordinary people, basically had a strong cultivation. Fireteam Captain 1 would be in Xiantian cultivation. Aside from the deepest part of the Forbidden City where the Great Sage's array was situated, Yi Shiwen also could not push his sense into the only towering Thousands Treasure Pagoda into the capital. This towering Thousands Treasure Pagoda was actually a great holy tool, faintly emitting the Great Sage's law. When encountering Yi Shiwen's spiritual senses, it automatically activated the defense array and blocked off Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen could not help but sigh. Thousands Treasure Pagoda were really rich. Their branches in various places were made of various grades of arrays. No wonder many people said that these Thousands Treasure Pagoda branches appeared in one night without any sign previously. It was a great sage tool. Of course, it could just appear at will. Sponsored content, however, having a great sage tool meant that there must be a great sage sitting in it, deterring all parties. But given a few thoughts, although Thousands Treasure Pagoda had only just risen up for a few years, its terrible financial resources and mysterious origins would induce many people to covet its wealth. At the same time, they would be intimidated by its foundation and origin too. If there was no strong master guarding the place, most likely it would be immediately divided up. Even if it was a giant in the southern region like true martial school, they were still quite intimidated by Thousands Treasure Pagoda. Wealth did play a role. Although some high-level people were jealous of Thousands Treasure Pagoda's wealth, its nature of being mysterious and unpredictable possessed a dominant problem as compared to wealth. In case they were not careful, it would be a big loss. However, these thoughts only passed through Yi Shiwen's mind. These were the headaches for the true martial school's big shots, and he didn't need to take care of these things at all. Entering the headquarters of Thousands Treasure Pagoda in the southern region, Yi Shiwen found that it was more magnificent than the branch he saw in Wind Dragon City in the past. There were dragon engravings and paintings everywhere. Flickering mysterious reflections of jewels dazzled people's eyes. Yi Shiwen said secretly, although this was a great sage tool, this kind of tool was often only about function and effectiveness. The aesthetic should come second. Even though the power of this treasure building was so vast, once such interior was chosen, it would come at the expense of considerable power. Apparently, it was true that Thousands Treasure Pagoda had great wealth. Yi Shiwen stepped into Thousands Treasure Pagoda, and immediately a waiter came up to say hello. "Sir, is there anything we can do for you?" The waiter was polite without belittling himself. Yi Shiwen glanced around. The waiter was actually a Legends master. In the Great Ming Empire, he could also be regarded as a master and shocked the existence of one party. In Thousands Treasure Pagoda, he could only serve as a waiter. However, Yi Shiwen was just a little surprised. After all, this scene was quite common in true martial school. In true martial school, where the talents of the entire South region were gathered, legend was nothing. This could be considered as average. Those of Truth Realm didn't have much power to speak, but only those with Sage Realm had some right to speak. Legend as a waiter was common in true martial school. I want to talk to you about big business in regards to pellets. Yi Shiwen spoke in a low tone with his dragon mask. Sir, please wait. The waiter saw Yi Shiwen's resoluteness, and did not dare to be negligent. He went upstairs to seek instructions. After all, Thousand's Treasure Pagoda's status were proven with countless bloods of those who attempted to challenge them in the last 20 years. After a while, someone who looked like a manager quickly walked downstairs. He turned out to be a master of half-step Great Sage Late. Such a person actually became a manager among Thousand's Treasure Pagoda. He wore a green shirt in his middle-aged. He quickly came to Yi Shiwen saying, I don't know what pellets business this big brother wants to discuss. He didn't ask Yi Shiwen about his identity and name when he came up. It didn't matter to him. For Thousand's Treasure Pagoda, it was nothing. As long as someone dared to offer it, they dared to accept it. One fireteam captain. It doesn't reflect the meaning directly. The original raw text meant a captain in the team of 5 people, as according to the ancient China military system. Note: please download the sponsor's game to support us. Chapter 667. Using powerful connections to intimidate others. Sponsored content. What kind of place was Thousand's Treasure Pagoda? It was a horrifying force that even many giants in the real martial domain were extremely fearful of. No one knew the depth of its background. Who dared to fool around with Thousand's Treasure Pagoda? Thousand's Treasure Pagoda dared to collect anything, regardless of whether it was stolen, or if it came from unknown sources. It's a kind of pellet that can help one to have a breakthrough and enter into the Sage Realm, said Yi Shiwen lightly. He could say it very lightly, but the manager could not take it casually by just listening to him. A kind of pellet that can help one to enter Sage Realm. He certainly believed that there were such pellets. In fact, the Tai Huang Pasheng Dan made by Yi Shiwen was just one of them, and there were not just one type of them. But this was not the main point. Basically, such pellets had to be of standard grade. However, even the so-called alchemy master couldn't produce the standard grade pellets in batches. The failure rate and the end result of refining non-standard grade pellets were completely astonishing. It almost reached a terrifying point instantaneously. Therefore, even if there were such pellets, they were mostly just a handful of the scattered ones and nothing more than that. But even so, it would cause countless people to compete every time they appeared. There were actually a lot of Sage Realm Masters in this world. In fact, there were many Sage Realm Masters presiding in all major forces. But compared to these Sage Realm Masters, there were even more legendary warriors who were unable to advance. It was exaggerating to say that there were thousands of them. So it was hardly sufficient to have the occasional 1 or 2 pellets that could advance one to the Sage Realm. It could be said that there would be no problem selling it since the demand in the market was huge. Even if the price was a little higher than the limit that a typical legendary master could bear, there were always some richer ones amongst the legendary. For instance, the former Yi Shiwen was more affluent than the average Sage Realm when he was still a legendary. Although there were only a few of such people, there were plenty of them in terms of real martial domain. When the base widened, the number of people was naturally more. Besides that, there were many families who put high importance on their juniors. It was common for some Sage Realm, and even Great Sage who had the financial capability to buy the pellets for the juniors in their families or martial factions. Sponsored content, however. How was it considered a big business if it was just these pellets? One pellet was priced at 10 million at most. Even if there were several of them, it was just tens of millions of elixir. Although tens of millions of elixir was a considerably large business, it was really not a big deal for Thousand's Treasure Pagoda. Thinking of this, there was a hint of disdain in his eyes when he looked at Yi Shiwen. Perhaps he came from some remote place. Although the pellets that enable breakthrough into the Sage Realm are rare, they are really nothing. Yet he says that it is a huge business. Despite that, the expression on his face remained unchanged. As the manager of Thousand's Treasure Pagoda, he still had some wits. It was impossible to refuse a business. I don't know if you brought it, brother, said the manager. Although he felt disdainful of the so-called fuss made by Yi Shiwen, he could feel a hint of aura in Yi Shiwen which intimidated him slightly. Thus, he dared not treat Yi Shiwen with disrespect. Yi Shiwen nodded. This time I brought 50 of them. Yi Shiwen had not finished speaking yet, and the manager was suddenly startled and blurted out, "How many? 50? The manager was almost shocked to death by Yi Shiwen's understatement. "What do you mean you brought 50 of them?" Originally, he did not take Yi Shiwen's words to heart. After all, these pellets were very rare, although they were very precious and countless people were crazy for them. If he could mass-produce them like non-standard grade pellets, then it would be a different story. But can these standard grade pellets be mass-produced? Of course not. This is a basic common sense. If those alchemists outside knew that Yi Shiwen was able to mass-produce standard grade pellets, they would probably be so depressed and ashamed that they would want to die. Sponsored content, so he didn't pay attention to the big business mentioned by Yi Shiwen at first, but now when he heard that there were actually 50 of them, he almost choked on his own saliva. How many? 50. This is a quantity that has to be accumulated over a long time. However, he soon discovered that it was too early for him to be surprised. Originally, he thought that he would already be extremely shocked when Yi Shiwen said he had 50 pellets. Yet, Yi Shiwen said another sentence which almost let him bite his own tongue out. "And this is the first batch. If it sells well, there will be endless supply of incoming pellets." Yi Shiwen glanced at the manager and said. Yi Shiwen knew what the manager was thinking at a glance. Yi Shiwen could see right through the manager's heart with just a glance, but he did not expose the manager, nor did he have the intention to dispute about it. Isn't everyone like that? He had a steady heart like a solid rock now. There was no need to make a fuss with this kind of person. He also thought about it before. He planned to sell all the pellets at one time initially, but he gave up the idea after thinking about it. It was simply impossible that 700 pellets would fill the entire market. It was not enough even if it was 100 times more. But he still decided to take it out in batches. Otherwise, it would be a bombshell to reveal 700 pellets at a time. On the contrary, supplying in batches would make others think that it might be a certain force of alchemists selling them. In this case, it would save a lot of troubles. Yi Shiwen was not very proficient at handling these things, but he was not unaware of them. There are actually more pellets incoming. The manager's gaze looking at Yi Shiwen changed immediately. He was right. This is a huge business indeed. The first batch of pellets alone is worth more than 500 million elixir. This is a wealth that can even make a great sage rich overnight. Sponsored content. If this wealth was obtained by ordinary people, it could be considered to hit the jackpot. Purely by pumping money in, one could pump up his cultivation to the great sage realm. It might only be insufficient for people like Yi Shiwen who consumed an awful lot of pellets. In fact, since Yi Shiwen started cultivating, the various elixirs and wealth consumed had totaled more than 500 million elixirs. Hence, this was nothing to him. 500 million elixir was not even enough to summon for Star Beast Avatar once. However, it was already an astronomical figure of wealth from the perspective of this manager. It was impossible for an average person to have such a splendid wealth. Even if he struggled for a lifetime, he could not achieve such abundant wealth. He was a quick-thinking man, as he almost immediately thought that Yi Shiwen might belong to a very large organization who had many alchemy masters, which was as planned and hoped by Yi Shiwen originally. This was the only possible reason that he could provide 50 standard grade pellets at once. The failure rate of standard grade pellets could be said to have reached a very high level. Therefore, no one could figure out exactly how many disposed pellets were behind the final 50 pellets. No average force could sustain such an amount. However, the manager did not know that Yi Shiwen could not only mass-produce such standard grade pellets, but also, most importantly, he could control the failure rate at 0. So it was impossible for him to lose money. It was only a matter of earning profit and how much he could earn. Meanwhile, the forces behind him were non-existent, as it was just him alone. However, this was the effect that Yi Shiwen wanted. This was so-called using powerful connections to intimidate people and taking advantage of other people's influence to exploit others. As long as it would save him some trouble, it didn't matter even if he had to make use of the illusory force. Thinking of this, the manager did not dare to be negligent and said to Yi Shiwen, "Brother, let's go upstairs please. We have a special inner room to talk about this." The matter of 500 million elixir made it impossible for him to not take it seriously. If there was no powerful force behind Yi Shiwen, maybe he dared to have the intent to steal it and own it immorally in the face of such a huge wealth. Although Yi Shiwen's aura gave him a very dangerous feeling faintly, this was the branch of Thousands Treasure Pagoda in the southern region. There was a great sage presiding here. He believed that everything would be fine if the great sage made a move. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't compare to a great sage. 500 million elixir was enough to make a great sage raving wildly. However, it would be a completely different case if there was a powerful force behind Yi Shiwen. How great was the force that it could produce standard grade pellets in such large quantities? If he dared to own this wealth by stealing, the Thousands Treasure Pagoda would chase him to the ends of the earth, let alone the force behind Yi Shiwen. It was absolutely impossible to survive. Yi Shiwen nodded, and the two of them went to the second floor and entered a secret room. "May I know what is your name, brother?" said the manager. He originally thought that it was only a few standard grade pellets, and it was just a one-off transaction. Therefore, he did not ask for Yi Shiwen's name, but now he must ask because Yi Shiwen said that there might be more pellets coming. "My surname is Long One," said Yi Shiwen. Those in the meteor world called him Master Long previously, so he simply nicknamed himself as such. "I see, Brother Long. I'm not sure if you can let me take a look at the finished product first?" The manager looked at Yi Shiwen and asked. Yi Shiwen nodded and took out a Tai Huang Pasheng Dan. He handed it to the manager and said, "You can go ahead and examine it." Yi Shiwen understood their caution. That manager called his man to take Tai Huang Pasheng Dan away, obviously to let someone examine it. There were many kinds of pellets in this world. It couldn't be stated one by one. However, since Thousands Treasure Pagoda ran such a large business, there was naturally a way to verify its authenticity and efficacy. Yi Shiwen was not in a hurry. He chatted casually with the manager while enjoying his tea. 4 hours later, Thousands Treasure Pagoda sent someone to send a message to verify that there was no problem with the pellet. "Brother Long, we at Thousands Treasure Pagoda will have all the pellets in this batch. We also want to have all your pellets in the future. We will take as many as you have. The prices are all based on the market price. We will definitely not let you suffer a loss." "Okay, that's a deal." One Long means dragon in Chinese note. Please download the sponsors game to support us. Chapter 668. Promotion from beta-sponsored content. After the 50 Tai Huang Pasheng Dan were proved to be authentic, Thousands Treasure Pagoda purchased all of them. They were not sold but stored instead. These Tai Huang Pasheng Dan meant the presence of Sage Realm Masters. One Tai Huang Pasheng Dan represented a Sage Realm Master. They had already tested this kind of pellet, and it was more powerful than any pellet they had known before in order to break through Sage Realm. Even if the consumer were less qualified, they could break into Sage Realm successfully. However, for those who were less qualified, they were not eligible to consume Tai Huang Pasheng Dan. A Tai Huang Pasheng Dan was worth 10 million, and even more expensive at times. If these pellets were used on a person with no qualifications, then it was not worth it at all. 50 Tai Huang Pasheng Dan was equivalent to 50 Sage Realm Masters. This was a very huge power, and with the continuous delivery of such pellets, it would create even more Sage Realm Masters. If these Tai Huang Pasheng Dan were sold to different forces and dozens were divided to each force, it would not form powerful forces. However, when these pellets were concentrated in one force's hand, it could play a great role. Although Yi Shiwen knew that ordinary alchemists could not mass-produce standard-grade pellets, he never imagined that the pellets that he produced spontaneously would have such a massive impact on a force. Shortly, the people from Thousands Treasure Pagoda sent 500 million elixir. When Yi Shiwen got the 500 million elixir in hand, he roughly scanned it and stopped looking at it. Then he walked out of Thousands Treasure Pagoda's doors directly. The manager sent Yi Shiwen out of Thousands Treasure Pagoda and immediately went to the top floor. He stood outside the door and said respectfully, "Young master, 5 million elixir is delivered to Mr. Long. Sponsored content. This manager did not know Yi Shiwen's name, so he called him Mr. Long when Yi Shiwen said his surname was Long. And not bad. I didn't expect that my trip to the southern region this time could seal such a big business. 50 Tai Huang Pashengdan is enough to create 50 Sage Realm Masters. Our force will also overtake several other forces in one fell swoop. You accomplished a great achievement this time. I will definitely not forget you. There was a cheerful voice behind the door as if the young master was making some promises, but the manager was still very cautious that he did not even raise his eyelids. He knew that the Thousands Treasure Pagoda was divided into several factions, and each of the factions had their own candidates. These were the young masters, but there could be only one Thousands Treasure Pagoda master. There would surely be another intense competition by that time. He did not want to participate in these things too early. He had lived for more than 1,000 years, so he had become very cunning. He would not express his position casually. Young master, should we send someone to find out the background of this person? Asked the manager. There is no need. There must be a huge force behind such a person. It would be terrible if the other party was annoyed after finding this out. The young master behind the door said, almost immediately rejecting the manager's idea. He was still depending on these Tai Huang Pashengdan to build up his own force. Why would he offend Yi Shiwen? Plus, we at Thousands Treasure Pagoda open our doors to do business. Nobody cares who he is as long as the goods are fine. The manager agreed. They all felt that there was a big force behind Yi Shiwen, so they did not dare to do anything with him. This was also normal. If it was a small business, naturally it would not alarm Thousands Treasure Pagoda to check them. If it was a large business, most of them would have big forces behind them. Thousands Treasure Pagoda opened their door to carry out business, and not to offend people. Soon there was no sound inside the door, and there was silence. The half-year period was fleeting. In these 6 months, Yi Shiwen had 10 transactions with Thousands Treasure Pagoda with a total of 500 Tai Huang Pashengdan. Each transaction consisted of 50 pellets. Sponsored content. Such a stable supply of Tai Huang Pashengdan shocked the entire Thousands Treasure Pagoda quickly. There were up to 500 Tai Huang Pashengdan from the beginning, until now with a total value of more than 5 billion elixir. It was also an enormous deal for the entire Thousands Treasure Pagoda system. After the first time, Yi Shiwen's treatment at Thousands Treasure Pagoda rose to profound level suddenly. In Thousands Treasure Pagoda, different customers would get different treatments. They were divided according to the 4 levels of Celestial, Earth, Profound, and Emperor. It was said that there were only a handful of Celestial-level customers, while most of the Earth-level customers had been dealing with Thousands Treasure Pagoda for many years. Yi Shiwen could be promoted to Profound level in half a year, because Yi Shiwen took out 500 Tai Huang Pashengdan consecutively, all of which were bought by Thousands Treasure Pagoda. Although it was very expensive, there was no place to buy such a marvelous thing even if one intended to. Usually they could only collect it sporadically, and it couldn't be scaled up. It was not easy to find a stable supply source now. How could they not be ecstatic? However, they didn't know that Yi Shiwen didn't plan to keep doing it. He already bagged 5 billion elixir. In addition to what he originally had remaining and the portion earned during this period of time, he already had 6 billion elixir in his hand. If the tremendous number was divulged, it would definitely cause countless great sages to go wild. Thousands Treasure Pagoda did not see anything amiss too, because they assumed Yi Shiwen was the representative of a certain organizational force. For individuals to possess so many elixirs would make countless people dazzle. However, it would not be that eye-catching if it was a large force. Only Yi Shiwen and Thousands Treasure Pagoda knew about this matter. If Thousands Treasure Pagoda didn't talk about it, Yi Shiwen naturally would not either. After all the 700 Tai Huang Pashengdan had been sold, Yi Shiwen would stop doing this. As for when he would produce pellets again, it would depend on when he would be short of elixir. In the past 6 months, the sign that a storm was brewing had been more evident. Many people had found disciples of Emergence School in Wind Dragon City and other cities nearby Tian region. It was said that they were sent to map the area. Soon, the emergence school would launch a large-scale attack to wipe out true martial school in one fell swoop. Amongst the clamors of these rumors, the major forces in the real martial domain had the intent to add fuel to the fire. This made the news spread even more quickly throughout the real martial domain overnight. The drama became more intense over time. Sponsored content. After completing the 10th transaction of Tai Huang Pasheng Dan, Yi Shiwen returned to true martial school straight away, but it was not for alchemy purposes. Although there were 200 Tai Huang Pasheng Dan remaining, he needed some time to collect the medicinal materials. Although true martial school had a great foundation and deep background, there were not so many ingredients and medicinal materials for standard grade pellets. After all, Yi Shiwen was going to exchange a whopping 700 standard pellets. It would take some time to collect them. Without the true martial school, Yi Shiwen had no other choice but to find medicines in the old forest and mountains for the rest of his life, if he were to collect them by himself. This showed that it would be very difficult for those who cultivate individually. All legatee martial warriors who belonged to sects would look down at those individual cultivators. Except for a few of them who had great talents, most of them had little cultivation. They belonged to the bottom layer and of unknown existence in the cultivation world. Yi Shiwen also sincerely knew that he had obtained countless benefits from true martial school. On the surface, it seemed that he had relied on himself along the cultivation path, and true martial school had not helped him much. Even the Tibetan Star Summit senior brothers didn't seem to help him much. However, it gave him many things that were not available in individual cultivation, which was opportunities. If he was not in true martial school, then he would no longer have the opportunities for all kinds of secret cultivation in the future, including the demon domain trial practice some time ago. He would not even stand a chance to participate in it. This was so-called. The master teaches the trade, but the disciple's skill is self-made. Yi Shiwen didn't think there was anything bad about it. He advanced each of his cultivation paths on his own. It looked strenuous, and he was way more tired than ordinary people. But in fact, he was actually way more stable than ordinary people because he could see everything clearly along the way. What he lacked was opportunities. What was the big deal with hard work? What he was afraid of was that there was no chance for hard work. With such an opportunity, he was already luckier than countless people. With 5 billion elixir in hand, he could summon Star Beast Avatar for a few more times. So even if a catastrophe came immediately, he also had a certain degree of self-protection, plus his personal cultivation was not weak. It would be enough to match against the intermediate great sage. He traded out 500 Tai Huang Pasheng Dan within half a year, because he also considered the fact that he was running out of time. If it was not due to the fact that he didn't know when the medicinal materials of the 200 pellets would be ready, he might even trade the remaining 200 pellets urgently. Although he also knew that once there was a big change, the prices of these pellets might increase exponentially. Who didn't want to boost their strength to survive in the face of a big change? However, Yi Shiwen couldn't wait until then. Yi Shiwen was about to enter into the mountain range of true martial school when he saw a figure descending from a distance. Yi Shiwen glanced at it, and it was Jiao Mujiao with a moon-white robe, but Jiao Mujiao didn't wear his dragon mask. Instead, he was in the appearance of a middle-aged man, looking very ordinary without any grandeur like when they first met. Yi Shiwen, where have you been? I finally found you, said Jiao Mujiao. What is so urgent? Asked Yi Shiwen. Beidou was very loose in its member management. It was normal to not contact them once in 100 years. There was nothing weird. I'm here to congratulate you, Jiao Mujiao said while giggling. Tsk. You are now famous, and your fame is about to spread to the starry world. You have even killed a great sage. You are really going against nature's order. Yi Shiwen heard him but did not answer him. He just glanced at Jiao Mujiao and could see the depth of Jiao Mujiao's current cultivation. Jiao Mujiao had already attained great perfection of Sage Realm. Only a few years had passed, and he had even practiced Sage Realm to great perfection. Such furious speed was astounding. Although he was inferior to Yi Shiwen, it also showed how great was his innate talent. Seeing that Yi Shiwen didn't respond, Jiao Mujiao said beamingly, "Good for you. The organization heard about your news, and has the intention to promote you as an Alcade star. Note: please download the sponsors game to support us. Chapter 669 in the Big Dipper Organization. Official members were named constellations, which include 14 of them. Aside from the newbies who had great potential like Yi Shiwen, most of them were half-step Great Sage Great Perfection, or even Great Sage Realm. Sponsored content above them were members named accordingly to the Big Dipper. They were a level higher than these constellations, and there were only 7 of them. Basically, only those who were very powerful in Great Sage would have the opportunity to serve in these positions. They were the 7 Big Dipper constellations lords. Last but not least, the Constellation Emperor, who was the person in charge of the entire Big Dipper organization. Overall, the Big Dipper organization had a distinctive hierarchy. Alcade was the last constellation among the 7 Big Dipper constellations. Even though it was ranked as the last constellation, one must be the strongest among the Great Sage in order to be the master of an Alcade. In Big Dipper, there were many warriors at his level. Some constellations even had more powerful strength than him. He didn't stand a chance whether it was in terms of qualifications, strength, or contributions. Therefore, he never thought he could become a constellation lord at this stage. Seeing that Yi Shiwen's face finally revealed a surprised expression, a smile of satisfaction finally appeared on Jiao Mujiao's face while he said, "Well, you didn't expect it too, right? I heard it was designated by the Constellation Emperor himself." Yi Shiwen was silent for a while. It turns out that the Constellation Emperor is involved in this. No wonder he could make the final call to appoint the Constellation Lord. Sponsored content Big Dipper could only be regarded as a loose organization. There was a clear hierarchy, but in fact, there was no clear relationship of subordination between the official members. Therefore, even though as a Constellation Lord, he might not be able to instruct some constellations effectively, especially those constellations with powerful strength that were even comparable to the Constellation Lord. They would not take the Constellation Lord's words to heart. However, there was one person who had the supreme authority. That was Big Dipper's Constellation Emperor. The previous generations of Big Dipper's Constellation Emperors were the mighty ones in the Transcendent Realm. Those who claimed to have an overwhelming strength advantage were still vulnerable in the face of the Constellation Emperor, even if they were invincible in the Great Sage Realm. Although the Constellation Emperor didn't talk much, no one would object once he spoke. "I must say that you have set a new record for our Big Dipper. No one has ever become the Constellation Lord in less than a century." Although the Constellation Emperor has spoken in person, your strength is the real reason that makes the old fellows who think that we are ranked based on seniority to be speechless, Jiao Mujia said while looking at Yi Shiwen with admiration. 4 Big Dipper members like them. Becoming the Constellation Lord was basically the ultimate goal of life to fight for. Despite his extremely fast cultivation in Sage Realm, where he attained Sage Realm Great Perfection from the original half-step Sage in just a few decades, he also knew that the cultivation time needed was 10 times, or even hundreds of times more after entering the Great Sage. Not to mention the Transcendent Realm, which really required both humans' effort and great opportunity to attain. Those Constellation Lord seats were basically held by great sages who had great mastery or great perfection. They were comparable to Temple Master in demon-worshipping religion. In a short time, one would not dare to have any hope of achieving it. However, Yi Shiwen was being promoted to become the Constellation Lord. How could Jiao Mujiao not be envious? But he was purely being envious. He and Yi Shiwen had been able to partner with each other for decades, and they had experienced different things a lot. They had a close relationship, so he could joke with Yi Shiwen casually. Sponsored content, however, Yi Shiwen did not show much joy or enthusiasm to be Big Dipper's Constellation Lord after listening to him. There were surely numerous benefits, and Big Dipper's resources would naturally lean towards Yi Shiwen. It could be considered to be a level higher than the current constellation treatment. But there was also a precondition which was completely different from the idle situation, when he was a constellation. In order to join Big Dipper officially and enjoy better treatment, he naturally had to contribute more. When he was a constellation, he could still decide whether to work for Big Dipper. But after he was promoted as a constellation lord, it would be different, as it would be compulsory to serve. Therefore, some people who did not want to be bound in this way were still constellations, even though they already had the strength of a constellation lord. Nonetheless, since the constellation emperor personally appointed him to take up the constellation lord position, it was considered an honor to him. This is superb news. You don't stand a chance initially. But the original Alcade no longer serves as the constellation lord, as it has been more than 1,000 years. You just have this opportunity because it is time to change a new person, said Jiao Mujiao. He naturally knew why Yi Shiwen was hesitating, because he had been partnering with Yi Shiwen for a long time. He also knew that Yi Shiwen agreed to join Big Dipper previously because of its easygoing environment. It would be a different story if he were to become the constellation lord. Let me think about this, said Yi Shiwen. He knew that Jiao Mujiao was more enthusiastic than him about this matter. He had no soaring ambitions in Big Dipper's promotion, but Jiao Mujiao was different. Jiao Mujiao had always been very keen in this aspect, often completing some Big Dipper's missions. It could be said that Jiao Mujiao was more competent than him. If it was not for his extreme cultivation that made him advance way faster than Jiao Mujiao to this day, there would probably be opposition noises inside Big Dipper. Sponsored content, however, he didn't think there was anything. It was more like a trade with Big Dipper. Whatever he received, he had to pay for it relatively. There was no such good thing in the world that he could take advantage of. Naturally, true martial school was a completely different situation. Then let's not talk about this first. Do you remember the invitation you received from the Alchemist Association when you were at Meteor World 30 years ago? Jiao Mujiao asked. Yi Shiwen nodded. He definitely remembered this event. At that time, the Alchemist Association's president of the Great Wei Empire had invited him to an alchemist gathering 20 years later because he had produced standard grade pellets. But that was almost 30 years ago. In the past 20 years, Yi Shiwen had experienced many things and almost forgot about it. Most importantly, it was now a few years past the agreed time. Even if they accidentally thought of Yi Shiwen, they would treat this matter as the past, so he didn't take it seriously. It was okay if he didn't manage to catch up. He was not going for the alchemy route anyway, so he didn't place much importance to it. You promised them at that time, and they have sent the invitation to Big Dipper now. Jiao Mujiao said with some envy in his tone. Yi Shiwen's progress in cultivation made him stunned. It was beyond just 2 little realms higher than him. When he first saw Yi Shiwen, although Yi Shiwen was already famous regionally for beheading someone in the semi-sage peak, Yi Shiwen's cultivation could not reach this realm. It was a lot lower than him. But in just a few decades, Yi Shiwen had reached a point where he even needed to look up to Yi Shiwen. He was confident that he would enter the Great Sage sooner or later. But that was the future. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen had killed a Great Sage now and escaped from the Soul Destruction Temple's Temple Master. Such a talent had already made him feel like Yi Shiwen was a monster, but Yi Shiwen even had some talent in alchemy to develop standard grade pellets. Yi Shiwen was simply not a human. Although most of the alchemy masters also had a strong cultivation, they were not on par with the level of their powerful alchemy skills. Plus, they were mostly elevated by pellets. Therefore, it was a very different situation. Is the invitation posted to Big Dipper? Yi Shiwen was a little surprised. Indeed, he agreed to it at that time, but when he thought about it later, he was a bit reckless. At that time, he covered up his identity. How could the other party find him? This was also the reason why Yi Shiwen didn't pay much attention to it during this period of time. I just didn't expect that they could find me through Big Dipper. The strength of the Alchemist Association force is really deep and unimaginable. They are indeed the giant figure that existed in the starry sky for countless years. Yeah, we actually have a lot of cooperation with the Alchemist Association in the past. We know some of their background, but they don't know that you are a member of us, Big Dipper. The Constellation Emperor also wants me to pass a message to you. Regardless of whether you want to be a Constellation Lord, he wants you to break into the Internal Alchemist Association. Jiao Mujiao hid the smile on his face and said to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen immediately understood that the Constellation Emperor hoped that he could become a spy in the Alchemist Association. Although they might not have any ulterior motive towards the Alchemist Association, it was always reasonable to prevent it beforehand. Perhaps they had relied on this method to place spies in many forces. Yi Shiwen could not imagine how vast a network they had operated over the past few years. Usually these undercover spies were inactive, and they would make a move once they were needed. Maybe they could be a complete game changer at critical moments. It seemed like Big Dipper was plotting a chess game, a long game indeed. Yi Shiwen was just one of the chess pieces. Every chess piece had its value. Yi Shiwen was not against this. Before he had enough strength to be a chess player, he had no choice but to be a chess piece. The key was to reap enough benefits for himself. However, he could also foresee that with Big Dipper's style of work, they would certainly not let his efforts be in vain. Every piece of information would probably correspond with an unparalleled benefit. Although it was quite materialistic, it was Yi Shiwen's favorite method as it had no strings attached. Things ought to be perfectly clear. I can agree to this matter first, but there are plenty of masters in the Alchemist Association. Even if I go in, I may not be able to occupy a high position, said Yi Shiwen. That is for sure. Lord Constellation Emperor will not force you, said Jiao Mujiao. Note: please download the sponsors game to support us. Chapter 670. From Yi Shiwen's perspective, Big Dipper was taking the world as a chess game, and they were playing a really long game. Yi Shiwen was just one of their chess pieces. They did not expect Yi Shiwen to be of any use or to occupy a high position in the Alchemist Association for the time being. Sponsored content, they did not know when the spy that they dispersed casually would come in handy, but they would be useful sooner or later. This was something that could only be done by a huge force with a strong foundation. Since Big Dipper's requirements were very loose, he certainly did not have to disagree. So he nodded and said, "Since that's the case, I agree to it." Yi Shiwen did take promotion of becoming the Constellation Lord seriously. After all, it was a matter of truly joining Big Dipper and becoming a senior member. However, there was really nothing to hesitate about this. Anyway, it was just up to him whether to do it or not. It depended on whether the price would allure him. Moreover, based on the deep foundation of the Alchemist Association, it was simply impossible for him to occupy a high position in a short time. It was only possible in a loose organization such as Big Dipper. Even so, he still had no access to Big Dipper's core secrets. Even if he was regarded as an official member of Big Dipper, he would not necessarily know more than those external members. Seeing that Yi Shiwen had agreed to it, Jiao Mujiao passed the invitation to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen looked at the invitation, and the gathering time stated on the invitation was exactly 1 month later. The reason why Yi Shiwen had not received any news for such a long time was actually due to the delay of their gathering. Judging from the invitation, this gathering actually brought together a lot of alchemy masters to refine a pellet. It was actually used to break through the Great Sage Realm. No wonder Big Dipper specifically invited Jiao Mujiao to talk to him about this. Sponsored content beneath the Great Sage Realm was a huge dividing line. Whatever below the Great Sage was considered nothing. Only after becoming a Great Sage could one be regarded as entering the ranks of first-class masters. In some small forces, Great Sage was eligible to be a founder to dominate a region. Even in a transcendental force such as True Martial School, Great Sage could take charge of a section and hold important posts. This was completely different from that of Sage Realm. At Sage Realm, there was still a way to break through with pellets to create a master of Sage Realm, but it would not work in Great Sage Realm. This was because Sage Realm was a change in the body, so pellets could work. But Great Sage Realm was a change in spirit, and there was no way to change it with pellets. Even the standard grade pellets were unable to achieve such effect. In ancient times, there were pellets that could do it. That was a legendary generation where it was many times more prosperous than it was today. It was full of geniuses, and the Great Sage Realm as well as Transcendent Realm was not a big deal because deities existed at that time. Many legends about deities that were passed down now were not just myths, but they were passed on because they really existed. That was definitely an inconceivable great world that was unimaginable among the people nowadays. At that time, alchemy was also many times more prosperous than it was now. Even the pellets that could break into the great sage were available. Now people could only think about how thriving was that era that they could break into the great sage easily by relying on pellets. It was not that there were no such pellets now. On the contrary, even after undergoing major changes, there were still some scattered pellets passed down, but the amount was too small. The Alchemist Association was committed to restoring the prosperity of alchemy in ancient times. Earlier, the situation was even worse than it was now. At that time, there was not even a pellet that could break into Sage Realm. It was also the Alchemist Association who restored many pellet recipes bit by bit. Although the major forces continued to do this too, the invested energy and vigor was voluntary. It was far from comparable with the Alchemist Association. Aside from the few pellet recipes that were divulged, most of the pellet recipes to enter the Sage Realm were held in the hands of the Alchemist Association. That was why the Alchemist Association could develop stronger over time. Nobody knew how many masters they had created and nurtured secretly using the pellets. Even many rich and influential families were very afraid of them. Sponsored content. Finally, the Alchemist Association was reaching out to the Great Sage Realm now. If it was a success, then probably even Great Sage could be mass-produced in the future. Then the Alchemist Association power would expand to a formidable level. No one would know. No wonder Big Dipper also wanted to make him an undercover agent in the Alchemist Association. Even Big Dipper, who had deep hidden forces, were afraid of the Alchemist Association. When they found the pellets that could break into Sage Realm previously, they did not stir up much commotion because Sage Realm was just Sage Realm after all. Regardless of the high quantity, it was difficult to really decide one's success or failure. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen couldn't help but to feel excited for it. In the beginning, he didn't have much interest in this gathering. It didn't matter whether he went or not. But now Yi Shiwen had to go even if there was no other reason than the pellet to break into the Great Sage. Even when he broke into Sage Realm previously, he was a bit powerless and needed pellets to help him. Now, although it was much simpler than others because his spirit had accomplished the complete transcendence, it was only relatively speaking. If it was using the normal method, perhaps it was better to break into the Great Sage within 100 years. 30 to 50 years were inevitable, but how could there be so much time for Yi Shiwen now? He definitely couldn't wait for 30 or 50 years, or even hundreds of years. This pellet that could break into the Great Sage Realm was undoubtedly great news for Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, this is a good opportunity. While you are at the gathering, wait for a chance to seize the pellets. This will save you years of hard work, said Yi Mo eagerly. From his perspective, any method could be used as long as Yi Shiwen's cultivation continues to break through. In fact, Yi Shiwen did not have the Great Sage pellet recipe. For ordinary people, it was simply impossible to obtain a long-lost pellet recipe from the ancient era, when alchemy was flourishing. Various methods were needed to restore part of it. But with Yi Mo by Yi Shiwen's side, he knew all the ancient secrets. Although Yi Mo was a person from Demon Domain, he was an antique who had lived for countless years after all. So he knew many secrets that were unknown to others. Sponsored content, however. Even if he knew the pellet recipe, he needed another astronomical wealth to collect the complete materials for the pellet production. It was similar to when he was collecting the medicinal ingredients to produce Tai Huang Pasheng Dan during the Semi-Sage. He wouldn't be able to gather all of the ingredients if it had not been for Big Dipper's help. This gathering was several years late compared to the originally planned 20-year period. It was not because of anything else, but because the materials were difficult to collect. Therefore, they had no choice but to delay for several years. Although the Alchemist Association had enormous power, this gathering was just an independent research of some alchemists. Otherwise, it would not be known to everyone. Without the support of the Alchemist Association, they could only rely on themselves. Although Yi Shiwen had received the invitation, he did not leave immediately. The venue was on a planet next to Meteor World. It was originally a barren planet, but was dominated by several alchemy masters who teamed up. The place served as a sect station for a sect created called Medicine King Valley. The Alchemist Association was not a sect. It was just an alliance of forces. Many alchemy masters were associated with the Alchemist Association, or were members of the Alchemist Association, But that didn't mean that they did not have their own forces. In fact, more than half of the members had their own huge force that provided strong support for their cultivation. Compared with other martial arts, alchemy's dependence on wealth could be said to have reached an unprecedented level. Many people relied on pellets to advance their cultivation, so it would be hard if there was no huge force to support them. This planet was one of the sex stations, and the Alchemist Association's president of the Great Wei Empire was actually Medicine King Valley's disciple. It took a long time for Yi Shiwen to go to Meteor World previously, but it was a world of difference now. It was not the same thing currently. If he used Big Dipper's teleportation array, he wouldn't need even 10 days to reach Meteor World. Meanwhile, the time stated on the invitation was 1 month later. Therefore, he still had a long time to buffer, so he was not in a hurry. In the remaining 20 days, Yi Shiwen wanted to push his cultivation all the way to the peak of the half-step Great Sage Intermediate. Although he could fend for himself against the Great Sage Intermediate now, it was merely self-protection. It was still a challenging thing for him to kill a Great Sage Intermediate now. However, if he could advance to the peak of the half-step Great Sage Intermediate, then he was confident that he could trample all over the Great Sage Intermediate. In the past 6 months, he had made a total of 5 billion elixirs, and the total number of elixirs he had was close to as much as 6 billion. It could be said that he was wealthier than he ever was. He kept thinking that the quantity of his elixirs was not sufficient. In fact, it was far less from enough. That was because he was considering the situation where he had to summon Star Beast Avatar at any time. He did not have the power to freely summon the Star Beast Avatar without fully integrating the Blood Slave with the Star Beast. So he could only use elixirs to forcefully summon it. That was equivalent to burning elixir pile by pile. However, if it was simply based on his own needs, it was absolutely sufficient. With such a huge support of elixirs, he was confident that he could advance his cultivation to the peak of half-step Great Sage Intermediate in the remaining 20 days. It was just 1 step away from half-step Great Sage Late. After coming back from this gathering, he would enter closed cultivation immediately to break through his cultivation to half-step Great Sage Late. Then he would be only 1 step away from Great Sage, and it was possible to step into Great Sage at any time. If there was a pellet that could help him break into the Great Sage at that time, he could even break into the Great Sage and rank among the first-class masters under the stars from then on. Note: please download the sponsors game to support us. Chapter 671 Rounds of space ripples flickered in the boundless starry sky, and a figure suddenly appeared in this star region, but it was a green figure. Sponsored content: Yi Shiwen appeared in a meteorite. Compared with more than 20 years ago, this star region had not changed much. In the vast starry sky, it was difficult to make any real changes in billions of years, let alone in 20 years. It might be a long time for humans, but in terms of the cosmic void, it was nothing more than a snap of a finger. After more than 20 days of closed cultivation, he finally pushed his cultivation to the peak of half-step Great Sage Intermediate. He might step into half-step Great Sage Late at any time. He had already planned to start close cultivation after the gathering ended in order to advance his cultivation into half-step Great Sage Late. Compared to the previous time, Yi Shiwen was already familiar with the place this time. Wearing Big Dipper's moonwhite robe, Yi Shiwen charged towards Medicine King Valley. When he was reaching Medicine King Valley, he could see a lot of warriors flying in that direction like a stream flowing endlessly, forming a stream of light in the universe. It was also a bustling scene. Those who could fly in the universe were at least warriors of the truth level. Soon the entire Medicine King Valley was in the vicinity. It was a gigantic star. It was a barren planet initially, but under the management of countless people in Medicine King Valley, it had become a thriving planet now. The mountains and rivers were beautiful. In addition, there were countless formations that penetrated into the ground and firmly absorbed countless spiritual energy. It was much more condensed than the spiritual energy of ordinary places. Aside from a part that was the residence of Medicine King Valley's disciples, most of the entire planet was planned as medicine fields, which were filled with precious medicines. In true martial school, there were such places as well. All major forces had such a common approach, But it was not at such a large scale. After all, they were not a force that majored in alchemy in the cultivation road. All spiritual energy was locked in by a series of arrays. There was no trace of medicinal power flowing out. Most people who did not have a special way could not enter at all. Therefore, although the medicine field was spread all over the planet, there were very few people taking care of it. Yi Shiwen descended from the light onto a road among the fields. He was not in a hurry to attend the gathering at Medicine King Valley, so he looked around. Sponsored content. Yi Shiwen, this Medicine King Valley is just a faction of the Alchemist Association. It is amazing that there are medicine fields of this size. Niang said while sincerely admiring the entire planet that was used for planting herbs. The cost of this is not cheap. But unfortunately it's not precious species. It's all herbs that can be grown in batches. Yi Shiwen nodded as he scanned around. From time to time, there were some herbs that were outstanding and unique among the other herbs, but most of them were relatively mediocre species. It was startling to have such a large scale, but because of this, it was impossible to grow any medicine king or precious special species. Because basically each of these medicinal materials needed favorable time, geographical and social conditions in order to grow. Most importantly, it needed the irrigation of countless spiritual energies. Certain medicinal materials even had to absorb the entire planet's spiritual energy in order to grow. For instance, Yi Shiwen's Mingxin ancient tree. When he discovered it, there was an entire dragon vein locked on the ground to provide the spiritual energy needed for the growth of the Mingxin ancient tree. It required great maintenance. At the beginning, Yi Shiwen didn't care too much about it, but when he really started to take care of the Mingxin ancient tree, he discovered that it was hardly a human task to nurture the Mingxin ancient tree. Just ensuring the Mingxin ancient tree would survive required massive spiritual energy. If he wanted to grow the Mingxin ancient tree, the amount of spiritual energy required was an even more astronomical figure. The situation did not improve until he caught that dragon vein. He simply transplanted the Mingxin ancient tree to the dragon vein, and then he was relieved. Only when the Mingxin ancient tree was rooted in the dragon vein that it showed a flourishing growing pattern. Although the Mingxin ancient tree was the legendary deity tree, an ordinary spirit's organism required less spiritual energy, the same principle applied. The more medicinal materials were planted, the more scattered the spiritual energy was. Hence, it was less likely to plant top-quality herbs. True martial school was able to grow this many medicinal materials, but it was not necessary. They could just purchase some low-quality medicinal materials. There were warriors who took the alchemy path in true martial school, but the number was not large anyway. So it was not necessary to plant so many herbs to cultivate their disciples. Sponsored content, however, different factions had their own considerations, and they couldn't be viewed in the same way. Yi Shiwen was not in a rush, but how fast was his footwork? It was just an hour, and he could see the situation of Medicine King Valley from a distance. He was already near the valley. Although it was called a valley, it was actually more like a huge plain surrounded by countless mountains. Even this group of mountains contained the truth of the true way. It was obviously being moved from faraway places by powerful people. The mountains were like dragons, which locked the entire underground dragon veins and spiritual energy. At the same time, they converged into a series of formations. Brother, are you here to attend Medicine King Valley's Truth Discussion Conference? Suddenly, a person caught up behind Yi Shiwen and walked to his side while speaking. Yi Shiwen turned around, and it was a middle-aged man who looked quite destitute. He was obviously an individual cultivator. Yi Shiwen nodded and said, "Is brother here to attend the Truth Discussion Conference too?" Yi Shiwen didn't show disdain like the disciples of many major factions, just because the other party was an individual cultivator. These individual cultivators were even tougher, like weeds on the roadside. They survived independently. It was very respectable that this middle-aged man could cultivate a semi-sage intermediate. Furthermore, he was a warrior who practiced alchemy. It was countless times more difficult than a typical warrior. Yi Shiwen restrained his aura with his aura convergence martial art. From the eyes of the outsiders, he looked like a normal semi-sage. Unless his skill was far higher than Yi Shiwen like a transcendent master, it was impossible to see through Yi Shiwen's disguise. Sponsored content. Yahihi. It's rare that this truth discussion conference does not restrict us, the individual cultivators, from participating. It is said that there will be a lot of alchemy masters. We are also fortunate to be present. Even if we just listen from a distance, it will be good enough. That middle-aged man said with a bit of self-deprecation. The biggest problem for these individual cultivators was not the shortage of resources, but the lack of martial techniques mentorship. Many individual cultivators who took on the cultivation road were completely due to coincidence or something. Most of their martial techniques were intermittent. It was similar to the previous Tibetan Star Summit who was restoring the Tibetan Star Sutra intermittently. For them, many paths had to be explored by themselves. It was far from the convenience of the major legate disciple. Having the opportunity to listen to many alchemy masters to discuss about the truth was more important than anything else. Such an opportunity was very rare. It seemed like the middle-aged man was a little self-deprecating after thinking about his own hardships. They dared not expect to reach the end of the true way, but they went as far as they could. I'm Yang Tingyu. May I know your name, brother? The middle-aged man cupped his hands in greeting. He saw Yi Shiwen as a semi-sage like himself, but judging from Yi Shiwen's demeanor, it was nothing like an individual cultivator. Yi Shiwen also did not show any hint of inferiority hidden deep inside like a typical individual cultivator. So he naturally knew that the person in front of him was extraordinary. My surname is Long, said Yi Shiwen. Since he was going to pretend to be Master Long, then let it be so till the end. It turns out to be Brother Long. Yang Tingyu saw Yi Shiwen didn't say his complete name, but he didn't mind. May I know which faction Brother Xiong belongs to? I'm just practicing individual cultivation in the starry sky outside the region. It's not worth mentioning, said Yi Shiwen. He had no intention of revealing his true identity. Although this place was far from the real martial domain, there was no guarantee that there were no enemies here. Seeing that Yi Shiwen didn't specify, he understood and didn't ask further. The two kept walking forward. As they got closer and closer to Medicine King Valley, they could see individual cultivators in pairs and in small groups everywhere. And they were all basically individual cultivators. Those warriors who had social status and background would probably have been escorted by the Medicine King Valley people earlier. In the minds of these major factions' warriors, individual cultivators were not important at all. Allowing them to sit in and listen was already doing them a great favor. It was impossible for them to send people to escort them. These individual cultivators were also very sensible and walked there themselves. They knew where they stood. Hence, they walked all the way without flying in order to show their respect for Medicine King Valley. Brother Wang, look at these individual cultivators. Don't each of them look like dogs who smelt the fragrance of bones? They are only allowed to listen, but they groveled here. All of a sudden, a frivolous voice sounded from the sky. Hearing this sentence, many of the surrounding individual cultivators' expressions suddenly turned pale. They even compared these individual cultivators to dogs. Such shame could be considered to be the ultimate humiliation. The crowd looked up and saw a group of young men in elegant robes commenting on these individual cultivators outrageously. They didn't care if the individual cultivators would hear them, as if they were really commenting on a dog. A fatty who was the leader showed some contempt and disdain on his face. Obviously, he was the one who said those things just now. Many individual cultivators heard this and glared at him originally, but when they saw the sign on his sleeve, many people were dumbfounded immediately. Even if some of them were extremely furious, they were just glaring at this group of young men fixedly. They did not dare to retort, as if they were afraid of something. Note: please download the sponsors game to support us. Chapter 672. Even if they were insulted like a dog, they still didn't dare to yell back. They just glared at this group of young men fixedly. Even if they were flushed with anger, they didn't dare to retort. They were all individual cultivators. Aside from a small number of individual cultivators who had exceptional talents and complete mentorship in the cultivation world, The majority of individual cultivators were at the bottom of the cultivation world, having no remarkable status. The group of young men in front of them who were major sect disciples was exactly the opposite of them innately. It was as if a group of poor losers who encountered a group of rich and dashing men. Even if the rich and dashing men did nothing, they could still overthrow those poor losers. The reality was very cruel indeed. Haha, look. Don't these people look like crazy dogs who are very mad? The fatty said with a laugh. The young men beside him laughed out loud, seemingly to echo what the fatty said. The person he was speaking to was a man in his 20s with sword-like eyebrows and sparkly eyes, who was dressed in a Chinese robe. He was very handsome and had an extraordinary manner. The fatty's words made him frown slightly and said, "Brother Zhou, these words are a little out of line." The fatty's original proud face suddenly stiffened, as if he didn't expect Brother Wang would say this to him, because of the individual cultivators that were like weeds and not worth mentioning in his eyes. There was a flash of resentment and hatred in his eyes suddenly. Although it was just a flash, Yi Shiwen frowned lightly after noticing it. It was true that individual cultivators had very low status in the cultivation world, but to poke fun at these people for entertainment was of no higher upbringing. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I am Wang Hongchang of Medicine King Valley. I am here to escort you into the valley," the brother Wang said to everyone with his arched hands. He had a graceful demeanor and excellent posture. Compared to the fatty, it was a world of difference. He made people comfortable and exuded good vibes instantly. Many individual cultivators cursed secretly in their hearts. They are both disciples of major sections. Why is there such a huge difference? It is really like a human and a beast. The fatty humiliated them unscrupulously. They were not good-tempered people as well. Although they dared not defame them, they already cursed in their hearts. "Brother Wang, what is there to say about these people? If it weren't for the seniors who showed mercy, these people would not even qualify to sit in and listen from afar. They should be deeply grateful for such an opportunity," said the fatty scornfully. His eyes were full of disdain. He had too many reasons to look down at these people. He was far better than these people in terms of mentorship, cultivation, or other aspects. Just like the rich and dashing guys, he could defeat the poor dwarf without even lifting a finger. His cultivation had already reached Sage Realm Minor Mastery long ago. Facing these semi-sage individual cultivators, he naturally felt superior. Even though these semi-sage individual cultivators already belonged to a very successful group in individual cultivation, it was nothing at all to him. "Even if we don't have a mentorship and our cultivation is far worse than yours, we still have one thing called dignity. Motherfucker, isn't it just a conference? I quit. I'm not going to listen to it, okay? We still need to be insulted like a dog by this dead fat pig, just to listen to this conference from afar. I'm not happy. Is this the sincerity of Medicine King Valley to invite all the cultivators? I don't think so. Even such people are worthy of an honor seat, but we can only listen as observers. So it can be seen that Medicine King Valley is just the same." Finally, someone could not take it anymore and scolded. It was Yang Tingyu beside Yi Shiwen who couldn't tolerate it anymore. He was the youngest among the crowd. He looked like he was middle-aged, but in fact he was not the oldest among these people, and his cultivation just reached semi-sage initial. He had the least experience since he was the youngest. That was why he had some protrusions. One, that were not found in other individual cultivators. They were individual cultivators, but who wanted to be at the state of remaining at the bottom, who never thought of leaping their cultivation to the top one day. It was just that these protrusions had been defeated little by little over time and vanished. At this time, it suddenly appeared again because of the fat young man's insult. Hearing his remark, the other individual cultivators' faces suddenly showed commending expressions and was indignant. They shared his grief and distress. Although this person was scolding, he was actually voicing out the thoughts in their hearts. Didn't they think so too? Why could this kind of person sit in the honor seat, but they could only listen from afar? Wasn't it just because they were born in a good family? They all submitted it too, but even if this was the case, they should not insult others. It was already a personal humiliation to describe them as dogs. Yi Shiwen was also slightly surprised while looking at Yang Tingyu next to him. He did not expect that Yang Tingyu dared to speak out for justice this time. Previously, he looked extremely cautious, as if his protrusion had been grinded off. He did not expect that hot blood was still flowing in his heart at this time. He was not optimistic about these individual cultivators, not because of mentorship or talents. What was important was a brave and fearless heart to move forward, and it was absent in these people. Talents were crucial in cultivation, but the more important thing was the mind. Only with a persistent heart that never gave up on martial arts could one carry on till the end. These individual cultivators' protrusions had already been grinded smooth. They only knew to tolerate whatever they could. In order to obtain opportunities and resources, they did not hesitate to sacrifice their dignity. But they did not know that this was ruining their possible future development. He just didn't expect Yang Tingyu still had some protrusions and hot blood at this time, which was somewhat surprising. Please do not misunderstand. We at Medicine King Valley are absolutely sincere in inviting everyone to come here. Wang Hongchang saw everyone fuming, and his expression changed suddenly. Hatred surged through his heart all of a sudden. He hated the fatty for talking indiscreetly. If these news were spread out, then Medicine King Valley's reputation would be ruined. One individual cultivator was nothing at all for Medicine King Valley, and it was not necessary to focus on it. However, it would be different in terms of the entire individual cultivators network, as there were relatively few masters in individual cultivation. But it was only lesser, not that there were no masters. There were still a few masters in individual cultivation who were renowned throughout the world, and most importantly, Medicine King Valley needed to rely on these individual cultivators in many aspects. One such was the collection of some medicinal materials, which were acquired from these individual cultivators to a large extent. If the news spread it out and enraged these individual cultivators, their collective resistance to the Medicine King Valley would definitely have a huge impact on the Medicine King Valley. This time, Medicine King Valley invited these individual cultivators to participate because they wanted to foster a good relationship. It was just letting them to listen anyway. It was nothing for Medicine King Valley. Although they didn't necessarily have to please these individual cultivators, they couldn't offend these individual cultivators either. That was only what a fool would do. But because of this fatty's few words of ridicule, he triggered a deadly bomb that attracted everyone's hatred instantly. Although it was the fatty talking, the Medicine King Valley was unjustly implicated while just being present. They were hated for no reasons. You have the sincerity? Is this your sincerity? Even if no one escorts us to the valley, and we are not qualified to sit in the honor seat, you allowed this person to insult us here? Although we are less capable and are not legatee, we are not to be shamed by anyone. Yang Tingyu said with a sneer. After he finished talking, he turned around and left, ignoring the crowd. It was evident that he was exasperated. For individual cultivators, especially for alchemy warriors, their cultivation was not mainstream in the starry sky, so it was extraordinarily difficult for those who did not have the mentorship to cultivate. This opportunity was very rare, but he was ready to give up. Between dignity and prospects, he chose dignity. Dignity, arrogance? Those are just like a pig or a dog. How dare you mention this in front of me? The fatty retorted abruptly, and his eyes were splashed with murderous intent. He hated it when other people talked about his body shape. Initially, he wanted to reshape his body and become perfect after his cultivation reached the sage realm, but he had not been able to reduce his body weight. So this subject was a taboo for him to talk about. Yang Tingyu even dared to call himself a dead fat pig just now. It really poked his trigger button. Want to leave? Come here. Sudden changes occurred unexpectedly. The fatty suddenly transformed a giant hand towards Yang Tingyu and suppressed him down. This giant hand, which was massive, pressed down the space directly. He wanted to press these people to death. He was already clouded with anger. He did not differentiate that it was Yang Tingyu who said it, and it had nothing to do with other people. In his heart, these people were like pigs and dogs who wouldn't matter if they died. They were on Yang Tingyu's side. When Yang Tingyu spoke just now, their faces even showed agreement, as if they were ridiculing his body shape. They were all just as bad as the rest, and all of them should be killed. He simply regarded these people as weeds who were not worth mentioning. Abrupt changes occurred suddenly, and everyone didn't expect that this fatty dared to attack without any warning in the Medicine King Valley. Even Yang Tingyu, who was just firm and emotional, did not expect that fatty would make a move with the intention to kill all of a sudden. The crowd wanted to escape at this time, but they were just semi-sage. How could they go against this fatty opponent of Sage Realm? Before they could react in time, the giant hand already appeared in front of them, preparing to press them to death. Just as they were desperate, a golden light burst from the sky, as if it were shining from the borderless deity's world. A thin and fair finger pierced through the golden light, poking at the giant hand directly with overwhelming momentum and irresistible force. One, a metaphor commonly used in Chinese context. It meant the bravery of a person to fight. Chapter 673. Boom. The entire sky was shaking furiously, and the extremely horrifying gasified giant hand just now exploded on the spot. The fatty's horrified shriek echoed, and blood was flowing across his entire arm. He was sprawling weakly and crippled. Everything happened too quickly. No one had enough time to see or comprehend clearly what was happening. Originally, the fatty was unleashing his invincible prowess, and those individual cultivators were all under his prowess, shivering in fear. But in a flash, that fatty's entire arm was crippled. Everyone looked towards a person dressed in a green robe standing majestically in the middle of many individual cultivators. Yi Shiwen frowned while looking at the fatty. His facial expression was indifferent without any sympathy. This fatty made him quite disgusted. He had seen many overbearing and arrogant people, but none of them were like this fatty. Their arrogance was due to their indifference and disregard of others. They never deem other people as of value, but they wouldn't degrade other people for fun. This was what made him feel very disgusted. You're just like a crazy dog, biting people everywhere. Yi Shiwen said calmly with a cold expression. Everyone was stunned on the spot. They did not expect Yi Shiwen to say such words. Indifferent. Yes, he was indifferent, as if the fatty was worth nothing. This was a more brutal pain than disdain. Even if it was disdain, it still meant that you are worth mentioning. But indifference meant you were nothing at all, just like humans facing ants. There was no reaction even when you stepped on it. This was the feeling. This sentence immediately made those individual cultivators feel very pleased. No one wanted to be called a crazy dog. If it was not due to their background and strength being too far inferior, they wanted to swear long ago. Compared with them, the fatty who blocked here for no reason was more like a crazy dog. A crazy dog barking. Meanwhile, those young masters who came with this fatty felt as if they were slapped on their faces fiercely, hitting them to the point of dizziness. There were mixed feelings of shame and anger in their hearts. These people also contributed in laughing at these individual cultivators just now. Although Yi Ziwen's words were directed at the fatty, they felt like they were slapped as well. The fatty looked at Yi Shiwen with bitter resentment, as if Yi Shiwen had committed some crime. He also couldn't believe that Yi Shiwen was able to explode his giant hand with a single finger. In his opinion, Yi Shiwen was just a semi-sage like those individual cultivators, and those who were below Sage Realm were just ants. But now this ant actually crippled one of his arms. How dare you hurt me, you individual cultivator? You are in trouble. You are in deep trouble. The fatty yelled at Yi Shiwen with a grudge on his face, like a beaten child who was yelling. From the perspectives of major sect disciples, if individual cultivators had offended them, they would be doomed. They would be in trouble. A very deep trouble. Yi Shiwen chuckled. A calm smile appeared on his face, and there was a sound of a loud slap approaching right after that. Then the fatty was slapped away directly. His plump body spun in the air like a top in the air before hitting hard on the ground. I'd like to see what trouble have I got into. Yi Shiwen took a step forward and charged to the fatty's side instantly. He sneered while looking at the fatty and said, I would like to see which sect taught such an arrogant and ignorant disciple like you. Yi Ziwen's facial expression was slightly cold. The original intent of practicing martial arts is to take charge of our fate and improve ourselves. But you used it to bully the weak for fun. It's best to just abolish it. said Yi Shiwen with a sneer. Yi Shiwen certainly was not a person with a chivalry spirit, who took pleasure in helping others. There were a lot of weak people who died in his hands too. But Yi Shiwen looked down at those who bullied the weak for fun. Yi Shiwen even felt that the fatty was not worthy of practicing martial arts at all. Seeing Yi Shiwen raising his hand, Wang Hongchang said quickly, "Senior, please be merciful." Although Yi Shiwen looked young, the cultivation world did not distinguish people's age by their looks. Besides, the most important thing was that everything was false in this society that applied the law of the jungle, and only tyrannical strength was the real thing. Although he was annoyed by the trouble that the fatty caused him, he also had to admit that the fatty's strength was not inferior to him. Yet he was sent flying with a slap now. It was conceivable that the strength of the green-robe young man in front of him was probably comparable to the seniors in his sections. Although the Medicine King Valley had a great scale, it was just an ordinary sect. It was a far cry from giant aces of the true martial school. Even if Wang Hongchang was the true legatee disciple of the sect, he was only in sage realm. As for great sage, he must be a first-class figure like the Supreme Elder, and his foundation was at most comparable to the top 100 legatee in true martial school. It was a completely different class. He didn't know why there was such a tyrannical master in individual cultivation. Although he hated the fatty, he had no choice but to protect the fatty. Yi Shiwen didn't even look up and stamped on the fatty while his expression was unusually cold. Following this fatty's scream, his diaphragm was instantly broken by Yi Ziwen's trample. Before he even had the time to react, Yi Shiwen had already trampled his diaphragm. One broken. What level of cultivation Yi Shiwen was in now? He attacked with all his strength, leaving the fatty's diaphragm completely crushed without the possibility of recovery. It was like turning the original green grassy land into a desert. It was impossible to grow any plants. You actually abolished my martial arts." The fatty's resentful eyes looked at Yi Shiwen with disbelief. This individual cultivator is simply too outrageous. Doesn't he know that this might bring him a huge trouble? In the cultivation world, those disciples with sects were often unscrupulous because there was a tyrannical sect behind them. Once something happened, the sect seniors would immediately seek serious revenge. Although the fatty was very powerful, the sect behind him was even more tyrannical. How could a single person's strength be compared with a huge sect? It was precisely because of the sect behind him that the fatty would recklessly look down at those individual cultivators, who did not have such a strong background. Wang Hongchang looked at Yi Shiwen awkwardly. He did not expect that Yi Shiwen would eventually make the fatal move. Yi Shiwen actually made a merciless move once he attacked. Without giving the fatty any chance to say anything, Yi Shiwen directly abolished his martial arts. "Having such people like you practicing martial arts is simply the shame of my generation," Yi Shiwen said lightly, but he was straightforward and had no hint of fear between his lines. Seeing that Yi Shiwen was so cruel and decisive, those sect disciples who were initially arrogant turned into birds and flew away suddenly. They did not dare to stay in front of Yi Shiwen, who seemed like a mega monster in their eyes. If they were slightly careless, they might be killed by this guy who looked moody and brutal. If they ended up the same as that fatty, then it would be miserable. For these people, all their arrogance was based on their own strength. If their martial arts were abolished, it would be more suffering than killing them. Even Wang Hongchang turned and flew away into the Medicine King Valley hurriedly. He was not fleeing like those people because he could see that although Yi Shiwen had been merciless and decisive while attacking, Yi Shiwen would not willfully murder the innocent. But since such a major incident had happened, he had no choice but to go back and report to the sect's senior officials and let them decide. In short, the incident would not be as simple this time. In the blink of an eye, these sect disciples vanished immediately, and the remaining were all individual cultivators now. At this moment, their glance towards Yi Shiwen had changed, and the casualness just now was gone. Before Yi Shiwen showed their strength, they could still consider Yi Shiwen as an ordinary individual cultivator. However, Yi Shiwen had now shown the strength that was like an elderly predecessor among the individual cultivators. So they couldn't help being careful. Yi Shiwen took these changes to heart, but didn't speak. "Senior Long, thank you for your help this time. Yang is deeply grateful." If you need to assign me to anything in the future, please don't hesitate to say it. Yang Tingyu came forward confidently and said. Perhaps because he had risked it all just now, so this seemed nothing now. People must experience ups and downs before they could make a big breakthrough in their state of mind. After experiencing the incident just now, Yang Tingyu almost died. The meticulous care he had practiced for hundreds of years seemed to be wiped out suddenly. It was like what the world said. Once a person had sudden enlightenment, he could thoroughly understand many things instantly. It's nothing. It's no trouble at all, said Yi Shiwen with a grin. He didn't even care about the sect behind the fatty. He could even escape if a great sage attacked. When Soul Destruction Temple's temple master chased him previously, he managed to escape too. He was now stronger than he was at the beginning. Would it be possible that the sect behind this fatty is stronger than the Soul Destruction Temple? Hesitating again, Yang Tingyu said, Senior, this person the disciple of Thousand Plants sect. Thousand Plants sect's influence in the nearby star region has grown rapidly. I heard that they are related to Meteor sect too. It may be a big trouble if they were to look into this. Why don't Senior? Yang Tingyi's intention was very clear to let Yi Shiwen leave. Thousand Plants sect alone was a strong force. Coupled with the inextricable relationship with the Meteor sect, they were definitely not to be messed with. The highest ruler of the star region nearby was the Meteor sect. No one had a good life after offending the Meteor sect, especially individual cultivators like them who were not liked and valued by anyone. Yi Shiwen just smiled and said, It's all right. This is a rare gathering. Any one of you wants to go in with me? 1. It referred to Dantian where Qi resides. It's also a common term in Eastern fantasy and martial arts novels. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.